Let's welcome the Governor of Nairobi and Karibu Nairobi, the green capital of the world. By way of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nasra Namba. I am the CEO and ESG lead at the Kenya Green Building Society. I'm also the chair of the World Green Building Council Africa Regional Network. And lastly, which makes me very proud to say, I'm also a member of County Assembly at the Nairobi City County Assembly, the best county in Kenya. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Distinguished guests, thank you so much for your time. As you know, we are anticipating an amazing week ahead starting today, where Africa takes charge of its narrative. But before we dive in, I'd like to first say that we need to give our due respects to our national anthem and the East African national anthem. So kindly remain standing for the same. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you may sit. Welcome again to the Kenya Green Building Society in partnership with the Alliance for Science and Government of Kenya's first event in the Climate Action Zone, the Pre-Africa Climate Summit. This event is solely dedicated to the built environment based on the understanding that Africa is going to be the largest continent in the next decade, with an expected 1.4 billion people expected to live in the continent, and a large number of that in cities. This is an important conversation that we can't afford to ignore. It is for this reason, as the Kenya Green Building Society, we felt it was very important to support the national government with our partners Alliance for Science, as well as the county government of Nairobi and the broader African region in championing this cause. But before we dive into the discussions today, I thought it was important for us to do two things. One, to remind ourselves of who we are as Africans. This is important because as we think about taking charge of the narrative as Africans, we need to remind ourselves of who we are. And second, I will also then welcome our friends from Burundi to get us started with our drum rolls so that we're ready to take charge of our narrative. So, over to you to start off with I Am an African. Thank you so much.
I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. My body has frozen in our frosts and in our latter-day snows. It has thawed in the warmth of our sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. The crack and the rumble of the summer thunders, lashed by startling lightning, have been a cause both of trembling and of hope. The fragrances of nature have been as pleasant to us as the sight of the wild blooms of the citizens of the veldt. The dramatic shapes of the Drakensberg, the soil-colored waters of the Likwa, Ikreli, Motugal, and the sands of the Kalahari have all been panels of the set on the natural stage on which we act out the foolish deeds of the theater of the day. At times, and in fear, I have wondered whether I should concede equal citizenship of our country to the leopard and the lion, the elephant and the springbok, the hyena, the black mamba, and the pestilential mosquito. A human presence among all of these, a feature on the face of our native land just defined, I know that none dare challenge me when I say I am an African.
Thank you so much. And now that you know what it means to be African, I think I'm more than willing to start you really appropriately with the drums that will inspire us today. Ladies and gentlemen, allow us to introduce to you the Gahigo drummers from Burundi. Thank you so much, Gahigo dancers. One more round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Thank you. So for those who are waiting outside, please come in. And I just want to say I'm really happy that they're here to do that because I can't. Yeah, the will is there, but physically just doesn't translate for me. But that being said, thank you so much once again, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're ready to move on to the first part of our morning session, which is the keynote speeches. Allow me to introduce the moderator for this part of our session, Philip Thigo, who is the current Executive Director for Africa for the Thunderbird School for Global Management. He's also a Senior Advisor at the Office of the President and Office of the First Lady, a friend of the Nairobi City County, a friend of KGBS, really a friend of everyone, including Alliance for Science. Yeah? Philip is the friend that you should have if you don't. That's just a secret I'm telling you guys. Yeah? Without further ado, thank you so much for your time, Philip. Over to you.
Scare me like this. Okay, that was scary. You should have told us this secret. Next time you want to do meetings, get the Burundian drummers. We will have no side events. Jesus. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. And as a friend, we'll try to move this very quickly. We are aware that our high-level speakers have other engagements. I know our colleague from the Africa Development Bank has to leave, so I will not provide any context. Please come make your remarks. And then we'll move it along as we can. Let me welcome Professor Anthony Nyong, Director for Climate Change and Green Growth from the Africa Development Bank. Just tell me, isn't it great to be African? We have the energy, we have what it takes. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to the African Development Bank to share some thoughts on this. We are the African Development Bank, your bank. We have just one goal: to address the issues of underdevelopment in Africa. Basically, putting it right, to foster sustainable development on the African continent. And anything that threatens that, any threat that we have is a threat to the African Development Bank's existence. And climate change is one of those threats, and we are taking it head on. And so I'm glad we are all here because it shows our commitment to what we want to do on climate change in Africa. And what are we doing? We've told ourselves, look, we're a bank. Others are doing what they can do. No single institution can solve this problem alone. So we have committed between 40 and 45% of all our lending over the past 10 years to climate finance, which means we do about $10 billion a year, which means about $4 billion of that every year goes to addressing the issues of climate change. And 67% of that goes to building adaptation and resilience, because it's the most important thing for us as a continent. How much do we emit? I tell people, if every African fell down, died, and doesn't decompose, we just save the world 3% of emissions. But I can tell you what climate change does to people's lives, to the economies, and so on. Our issue is, how do we build resilience to that? So we commit 67% of that resource to building adaptation and resilience. This makes us the first among all MDBs to do it because we listen to the cries of our continent. We're not a big emitter. Does not mean that we are not doing things to keep ourselves low. The unfortunate thing is that the global community has forgotten us. We are not emitters. Attention is paid to high-emitting continents or countries to bring them down. So we are not high emitters, and we're struggling with this little resource we have for adaptation. Globally, it's less than 10%, and that's where we play in. So the African Development Bank is out to expand that horizon to make money available for others. I'm glad that we are here. This is an action zone. We have talked for too long. And I'm glad, that's why when I saw this, I felt, even though I'm needed at KICC, but let me be here to encourage us. We have talked for too long. We have owned the worst narratives you can imagine. We own narratives like we are the most vulnerable continent, we are the least resourced, we are the most impacted, the narrative goes on. I think we need to change that. We have what it takes to change that narrative. Our natural resources are next to none. We have what it takes. We don't have the Eiffel Tower, but this is our Eiffel Tower. How can we harness such resources to address climate change? How can we address our social capital? How can we address our environmental capital? Tidy them up to address climate change. I can give you a list. 30% of all the good minerals, what we call the green minerals, are in Africa collectively. But where is it being used? Who benefit from these resources? Is it the Africans in Africa? Probably not. This is a narrative we need to change. We have what it takes to change our paradigm. And let me end by saying, this is not the first time. There was a time that Human Development Index was one of the Human Development Indexes was the number of telephone lines per certain number of people. In this very country, Kenya, they had not met that HDI. Not everybody had a phone, but they created M-Pesa in this same country when we did not know exactly how cell phones were working. People were still using landlines. Some group of young men and women sat together and created M-Pesa. And M-Pesa has become the mother of mobile money all around the world. I believe that in this same country, in this same summit we are hearing, there are certain people who are going to provide that solution. That can-do spirit is still there. You will do it, we will do it together. We're going to find solutions to Africa's climate change programs. What I can assure you is that the African Development Bank will stand behind you to make sure that those solutions are found. Then we stop giving ourselves those terrible negatives. If you look at the face of climate change, any pictorial you want to see on the impacts of climate change is Africa. That has to stop. We are a solution. We provide the solution, we are on the table, and we will collectively address issues of climate change. We've talked for too long, let's act. Thank you very much.
And as he leaves, of course, he leaves us with an able colleague, Sonorin, who I think will stay for the rest of the meeting as he sees him off. Let me then re-engineer this again. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. After those drums, if you're not saying good morning. I think today we are gathered here, as Nasra mentioned, as a precursor to the Africa Climate Summit that starts in earnest tomorrow. And with a focus on the urgent and critical issue, I think, around sustainable finance, but also partnerships for the built environment. And as we heard the previous speaker, it seems like money is not the issue. There are bigger challenges. We've had a lot of conversations in all these years around climate change adaptation, and it seems like we talk about climate, we talk about zones, but we don't talk about action. And so I think, again, just to thank Alliance for Science and Green Building Society for bringing back the action into climate. Because as you said, we've talked too much. Let me also just have a special mention of His Excellency the Governor of Nairobi. It is a Sunday morning. Is there any other politician in the room? I think the silence speaks loud. And so let's give him a hand. Because when there's no action, it means there's no leadership. And so we need more Sakajas, we need more Honorable Sakajas in this space. He leads by example, and most of the time, the example is just showing up. And I know many of you invite high-level government folks, they just don't show up. And so again, let me just again thank His Excellency the Governor. In every meeting I know that he's been invited, he's actually shown up. And so sometimes he's showing up, but also he's leading by example. And so again, just to continue, thank you on that. And I think also as we move towards the Africa Climate Summit, I'm sure many of you have looked at the agenda. I think it was brilliant for Alliance for Science to put this on Sunday, because then it's not crowded with the very busy agenda that we see. But also I think it very much places focus around the climate crisis in Africa. As the previous speaker has mentioned, every face you see around climate crisis is Africa. But I think we are missing the point that climate is not in isolation. We are living in an era of multiple interconnected and accelerated crises, and climate just underpins that. But also, the impact and effect of climate is very much local, and more so in cities. And so I think it's just apt again when we have the governor of Nairobi here, even within his role as C40, to begin to visualize that and underscore that we need to place emphasis on where climate change affects many people most. It's good to talk about climate in these international spaces, but unless it is grounded in the realities of people, and according to, as you've heard, President Mbeki, being able to understand the very definition that I am African, then we know that we have to ground climate action within the realities of Africans. And so let me now invite Dr. Sheila. We also need some gender in this conversation. The Executive Director of the Alliance for Science and the visionary behind the Climate Action Zone, to give her remarks.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, Governor Sakaja, what a pleasure to have you here to honor this moment. All distinguished guests and my dear sister Nazra, thank you for the work you've put together to bring together this moment. I'm just going to say a few words. And when I was trying to think about what to say, I was thinking about Nairobi, the name Nairobi, and the stories I heard. I'm Nigerian. I came here for the first time in 2009, fell in love instantly with the country and said, this is it. It's got everything, and I can see myself thrive and grow old here. And I heard the story that when the Maasai came through this area, they said, Enkare Nairobi, this is a place of cool waters. We can find good pasture. We can thrive. This is a good place. And they blessed it and they honored it and they made it somewhere special. Who knew then what Nairobi would be? But the Maasai saw something that was beautiful and sacred when they called it that and gave it that name. Then when it became a city in 1963, and it became thriving and bubbling, and people said, this is the green city under the sun. Who knew then that by 1992, this greenery would be precious, that the word green itself would have a different meaning, that it was not an abundant resource, that it was something really precious. And who knew? But maybe we should have known. And then by 1992, when we had the Earth Summit, and we all came together and said, something is happening to our planet. And what is it? And we began to notice, and scientists and world leaders came together and they said, what are we going to do about desertification, about water, about life on land, and all of those things? When we came together, we began to know. And there's a poem that always sticks in my head from T.S. Eliot. He says, after such knowledge, what forgiveness? Once you know, how can you forgive yourself for not acting? We cannot forgive ourselves because we know. We know, and we should have known, and we should know, and we can know. And so as we grow and we thrive and we see a city bubbling and thriving, the science that underpins it, the cool waters upon which the city is built, the pressure that is on the rivers, we know what that means. We know what that holds for the future. We should know, we can know, and we should begin to prepare, because we are the ones that are causing this, and so we must take responsibility. And so it's wonderful that as we dream of better cities and more prosperity, and we should dream that, because we've had a long time as being the poor South, the developing world, the impoverished majority. It's time for us to dream of better futures, but at the same time, we have the knowledge of what it will cost us and how, as a planet, we should prepare ourselves to meet those costs. So we know. So we at Alliance for Science, we are a global science communication initiative, and we help to bring the science to the fore, and we try and do it in ways that makes it easier, not makes it onerous, and helps people to take the science that they need to answer the questions and to prepare for the future that we want. So we decided to convene this space to bring together partners, to have those conversations, and we would help to bring a grand narrative to it, bring energy, bring enthusiasm for action, because we have no more time. There is no more time. And so I'm so grateful and excited that this moment is happening, and that we can now begin to prepare and dream big, but dream with the knowledge and the responsibility that is up to us to make sure that our future cities are sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sheila. Now you understand why we have the Climate Action Zone from our adopted sister from Nigeria. We should do something about your passport. I'm lobbying publicly. Thank you so much, Sheila. As we move towards, of course, sort of the global perspective, but also I think Sheila brings in a very important component around scientists. Africa has always been a recipient of knowledge. We've always been seen as non-scientific. And so when you have Alliance for Science choosing to put up a center in Kenya, but also something called a Global South Hub to begin to build capacity of scientists, but also linking science, to Mbeki's point, with the I am African bit with the African knowledge that is not necessarily thought as formal science, but drives formal scientific knowledge, I think that's critical. And so hopefully many of you from the international community who are here can begin to rethink how you relocate or begin to establish your centers in Nairobi. Because really, if you're not here, first of all, you miss the drums, but well, this is the center. This is the climate capital of the world. Without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Chumo, CEO of Mama Doing Good, to offer some brief remarks. Dr. Chuma and I work with the First Lady. Please.
Good morning. Your Excellency Johnson Sakaja, Governor of Nairobi City, whom share the same alma mater. And I was his senior, but he's my senior today. Your Excellency Nados Bekele from CEO Hawuda Nebat, Sid Mohammed Sheila, Executive Director of Alliance for Science, Professor Sanjeev Kakram, Dean of at the Dandaba School of Global Management, Your Excellencies, ambassadors who are present here today, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored today to be here to represent Her Excellency Madam Rachel Ruto, who is the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya. As the CEO of Mama Doing Good, the organization that delivers programs of the First Lady of this Republic of Kenya. At this juncture, I want to bring you greetings from My Excellency Mama Rachel Ruto. she would have wished to be here as a chief guest, as requested, but I'm sure she's doing something else equally the same year. But she has actually sent me to bring greetings to this audience. Asante sana. I'm happy that from the discussions that has actually begun, we are actually talking about Africa, and we are talking about our business as Africans, and also looking at the best ways that we'd be able to deal with these issues, and more so on climate issue. And I know the issue of climate change is no longer a myth. It is it's a reality. It's no longer a discussion by academicians, but it's a discussion that has now for us to sit here and actually say, what do we do as people of Africa? And I know, as said earlier on, the discussion has been there for long. I think this high time, as we have actually said, to say, what do we do as people of this continent, and address it, and leave, the issue of thinking about the other people assisting us. But we should say, what can we do as people of Africa? At Mama Doing Good, we believe in catalyzing socio-economic transformation in communities to achieve a quality, holistic life through spirituality, collective agency, voice, and influence. Mama Rachel Ruto came up with an institution called Mama Doing Good with 3 pillars. One is on women economic empowerment, and I'm happy to see, I think, a good number, almost, I think over 60% of the people I'm addressing today are women. And I'm sure if she would be here, she would have been very happy to see this. And she has actually done, we are talking about over 14,000 groups of women participating in what we call table banking, and more so on matters to do with financial inclusion. And I think this is a model that indeed will be able to spread across, for example, Africa, to bring on board the women to ensure that they are economically empowered. Today, we can stand and actually appreciate testimonies from the many women that we have who has actually come on board and actually participated in this women economic empowerment. And the same thing is that as women economic empowerment, we can't actually forget about some of the cross-cutting issues, and one of it is actually climate change. Today, I want to tell you that somewhere in Africa, there is a woman who woke up maybe at 4 to go and look for water, or went even from yesterday looking for water, but she's here to come, or even to arrive at their homes. And this is a serious thing that we really be able to see, because the most affected people are actually the women, the youth, and the children, and also the people with disabilities. And therefore, as we sit here today, it is a question that we should be able to discuss. What do we do? What do we actually, how do we arrest this situation so that we can be able to bring our people on board? And therefore, even back here in Kenya, we have just passed, you remember, the almost 2 or 3 years of drought, where we lost a lot of, livestock, we lost a lot of crop. There are many animals, even the wild animals that we really depend on for tourism did perish. And therefore, this is a serious thing that we really need to think. And I think it is high time that we are discussing this at this African Climate Summit. At the heart of this discussion, the focus of the built environment, housing and building, making it safer, inclusive, and sustainable cities is actually the people. And I know today, cutting across Africa, we have our cities. And we are seeing many people actually coming to the cities to actually come and, their livelihoods. And we are actually seeing that with this kind of impact, we are actually experiencing a lot of negative impacts as a result of the climate change. Issues to do with the waste management, issues of water quality, issues of, unpreparedness in terms of emergencies and those kind of things. And therefore, I think as people, we need therefore to look at it and actually look at what are the best ways to handle. And that is why I think through this discussion and through the Climate Summit throughout, as people of Africa, we need to actually look at what is our focus, What is our discussion? What would be our collective, our focus and our campaign as we go to maybe COP28? What is it in terms of the housing? And I'm happy that our governor is here. And actually, issues to do with, for example, the water quality. We have, for example, a river cutting across Nairobi. Any other city, whether it is in West Africa or North Africa and all that, we are talking about our water quality. We are talking about the air quality. We are talking about how safe our buildings, courtesy of the effects of climate change. These are the discussions. In particular, those most adversely affected when this is highly prioritized are the women, the elderly, the children, as I've said, and we cannot afford to leave them behind. They need to participate right from the formulation stage of policies and interventions. And I think for sure, the most important thing is that we need to really look at our policies, look at the ways that we are actually talking about in terms of implementing them. And more so, I would want to say that I think, as we've said, we've discussed and we have talked much more. We have even those policies. The issue that is actually we need to do is to implement them, is to work on them. We are not having shortage of policies and even legal mechanisms. We have them. If you go today, we have a lot of, go to our shelves. We have all the legal mechanisms, even at the county level. The challenge here is probably implementation. And I think our discussion today is, it is high time. It is now that we need to implement them for the benefit of our people, for the benefit of the future of this country. It is for this reason that Mama Doing Good, we envision and aspire to work towards an equitable society where every person lives a happy, fulfilled, and transformed life. That is why we are saying it is the rights of the people of Kenya, the right of the people of this continent, and therefore it is no longer a question of if, it's a question of let's do them what they're actually supposed to do, let's give them their rights, let's support their environmental justice, and I think this is actually the thing we are talking about. Empowering women, youth and children is a priority in creating better societies, and it is for this reason we have assisted over 14,000 female-led women groups that bring together over 170,000 women through our Joyful Women program. From where we sit, we are talking about over 14,000 groups of women, and they're actually cutting across our country. We are now in all the, approaching all the 47 counties. We are also proud of our African heritage, and through Karakana, our social enterprise, we facilitate the transfer and preservation of indigenous skills in the production of quality handmade items for sustainable livelihoods and the well-being of over 100 vulnerable groups. As we, from where we sit, we have a program called Karakana, where we bring on board women, and more so the vulnerable women. We are even including the women who are actually at the prison, who are actually doing what we call the cross-stitch for them, and with a lot of thematic in terms of environmental and climate change actions. And by the way, the women who are actually in these prisons, they are not there because probably they are criminals as such. Some of them were actually found, maybe they were actually fighting for their families and all that, and they found themselves being locked. But we have actually, through the compassion of Our Excellence, the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, has been actually bringing on board the women, and more so ensuring that we also conserve and deliver the issues of climate change. I want to welcome you when you go to, we have the First Ladies Pavilion at the KICC. Make sure you just pass there. You'll be able to see what I'm talking about. We are excited to have youth join us in supporting Africa in taking charge of its narrative, and look forward in particular to shaping and championing African solutions to Africa and the world. The discussion and efforts today to mobilize climate and carbon sustainable finance to build green and resilient cities for a better Africa is timely, and as the continent grapples with rapid urbanization. We also support the efforts that brought you all here, because to the First Lady, climate action is crucial in winning the investments and development conversation in Africa. This is because we acutely understand and recognize that mobilizing sustainable finance and partnership for cities in Africa is crucial for several reasons. Firstly, it can support the development of green infrastructure and renewable energy, addressing climate change and reducing carbon emissions. Secondly, it can enhance urban resilience and improve the quality of life of our people in Africa. Lastly, it can attract investment, create jobs, and foster economic growth, ultimately contributing to the overall sustainable development of African cities and helping us to build the Africa that we want. In conclusion, we would like to thank the Kenyan Green Building Society and the Alliance for Science for focusing on this topic, because it comes at a crucial time when housing is a key priority for Africans and African governments. And we are particularly keen to follow the outcomes of the discussion, the projects that showcase what we are doing as people of Africa and as a leader in climate action and innovation. On behalf of the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, Mama Rachel Ruto, I would like to wish you all fruitful deliberations and a successful week in Nairobi. With those remarks, thank you very much, and you are all welcome, and actually sample the Kenyans what we have. Thank you so much, na Mungu awabariki.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chumo, CEO, and the Office of the First Lady, and Mama Doing Good. Mama Doing Good is more than 300,000 women across 47 counties, 15,000 groups, revolving $20 million US, their own money. We're talking about finance, so when you say I'm African, that's their own cash. So I think it's important to think that women just don't want to be helped. They have their money, they just need support. And in most cases, they need men to stay out with their violence. Tumesema violence ni ya kawaida. Without further ado, it is my distinguished honor, and if we can remain upstanding, to welcome the Governor of Nairobi, His Excellency John Sakaja.
Oh, let's give them a clap. Please, let's be seated. I've asked my team, County Secretary, we must engage these guys. Every time of a meeting, isn't it the most African way, for applause? Well done, well done. The team from Burundi, let's clap for them. Asante sana. We have a very close relationship with the Burundians. And in my earlier iteration, when I was chairman of the then ruling party of Kenya, entered into an agreement with CNDD-FDD. So please, when you go back, pass my regards to Pascal and the team at your party, CNDD. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sheila, Dr. Chumo, thank you so much for your remarks. Philip Thigo, everyone's friend. As Nasra has so aptly put, Nasra, thank you for what you're doing. We, as Nairobi County Government, are so proud of you. Keep shining, keep shining. Keep raising our flag up high. Allow me to first take this opportunity on behalf of the great people of Nairobi, to welcome all of you to Nairobi, the world's environment capital, the climate capital of the world. Karibuni, Nairobi, for those who are not from here. And I hope you enjoy the next few days. Stay on, don't be in a hurry to leave. Nairobi loves you. And Nairobi will, I'm sure, will thrive with you around. We've taken great lengths to make sure that this Africa Climate Summit is successful, and we're confident that it's going to be a life-changing experience in the world's environment capital. Karibuni sana, Nairobi. It is so wonderful to see you all. So many distinguished innovators, leaders, entrepreneurs, and builders who are here today. I'm pleased and proud, not just as your host, but also as well as the host for the entire conference itself. And not just because we gathered to think through some of the most important and pressing challenges the world faces, but because we are here in Nairobi, and we in Nairobi have a distinctive story of innovation, resilience, and success to tell. And I'm glad that the speakers who have preceded me have been able to acknowledge this. Actually, Dr. Sheila, Nairobi became a city not in 1963, but in 1950, on the 30th of March, when we were the first city in the Commonwealth to get a charter, the first Commonwealth Charter. It was given by the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. And if you go to the Hansard of the House of Commons in the UK, somebody asked, why is it that Nairobi is getting this before any other city in the Commonwealth? The description by the member, the minister then, really aptly, I've never had such a description of what Nairobi is. And he says, this is the capital of the continent, you know, and described the water, the fresh water. The Maasais weren't passing by. This was their Manyata. Actually, State House, where the president sits today and where the colonial government sat, used to be the Laibon's Manyata, because it was the highest point of the land. And Nairobi has that history. This is your home, everybody. Kenya is where the earliest fossils of human have been found, Turkana Boy, meaning when you come to Nairobi, you're actually coming home. So Karibuni. And it's also possibly the only capital in the world where you can enjoy animals and the natural, unspoiled, untouched habitat at the Nairobi National Park and have the skyline of the city. So I'd love to welcome you all during your stay to make sure you get to visit the Nairobi National Park. And to add on to it, now we have electric vehicles to give you your tour. You know, you can do your tour on an electric. Imagine just gliding through without any noise, no diesel engine, looking at the lions and the elephants and the cheetahs, you know. Wouldn't that be an amazing experience? So Karibuni. This morning here with you, I want to set out some of the challenges we face and then gesture to a plan of action for solving them together. And finally, show you our vision for the future of this city that we love and for African cities in this discussion. And I'm really glad that Professor from ADB who left said that indeed Africa's voice is now at its rightful place. And we've said that as a continent, and actually as a global south, that we're no longer willing to be dictated upon what our actions should be. The lowest emitters in the last 10 years will not necessarily be in the next 10 years. And so we really must find our voice. We must look at this continent in terms of the youngest continent, our young people. What do we need to do? How do these discussions need to be practical? Because many of the people in our villages and in the cities actually think that for a long time we've been just engaging in high-sounding discussions driven by the global north that don't affect us. So all our interventions must be practical. We must talk about green jobs. We must talk about the future and our young people and our place on this. Our challenges are urgent. Climate change is here. Our buildings are old. And I'm really grateful for what Kenya Green Building Society is doing. Many of these buildings are substandard. Our drainage struggles to keep pace with the needs of the millions of people who call Nairobi home. Resources are scarce, and which is why I'm glad we're talking about partnerships. There's no one government anywhere that can be able to do this on its own. We can raise taxes. We intend to raise an infrastructure bond for the city of Nairobi, but all these sources of income will ultimately fall short of the need and the kind of interventions needed and the thinking that is needed. Climate, money, infrastructure, resources. These are immensely serious challenges. How do we meet them? First of all, together. We must meet them together. we need to see it as concerted effort from all players, because we know the cost of not doing it. We need green construction, not just to meet our climate goals, but to grow our economy and our resources. And as I've said, all interventions in climate action must have a direct impact on jobs and on the economy. If we have young people in work building the sort of housing infrastructure that Nairobi needs, and that has been an agenda of our President, His Excellency William Ruto, and our agenda at Kenya Kwanza, to meet our climate commitments, then we are invariably also creating jobs, thousands of jobs, and then our governments can expect more revenue. There is a virtuous cycle that is available to us and an opportunity for us as governments. Let me mention possibly two other extraordinarily important aspects of green building that matter. First, many of you, I think, will know that Nairobi has endured a high and rising rate of respiratory disease. And that's partly because of pollution and partly because of the quality of our buildings. Now, respiratory diseases don't get as much attention as some of the more obvious problems that our cities face, and Nairobi included. If anything, the more damaging, for passing under the radar, makes it more damaging. They rob our children years of school. They limit the productive lives of our adults. They kill many more people than you'd expect and never get noticed. Proper green building secures the long-term health of our cities. To be clear, this is only one aspect of the changes to the quality of life in the city that green buildings gives us. But I want to emphasize it's because it's both vital and it's easy to miss, and that's why I'd love to emphasize that. Let it remain in your memories. Let it also stand for the quality of life that we must achieve for the people of our cities. The second thing, of course, and I think that really colors much of the discussion, is energy efficiency. Energy in our country and in many of our African cities is expensive. Incomes are low. Energy efficiency needs to be a priority in our new construction, and it is a priority for Nairobi in our new construction. Yet again, I and my team are open to consultation. We want to discuss with you. We want to hear your ideas, and we want to forge, clear action, moving together. And that's why we pose this as a challenge, to you. Come and talk to us about your plans and our plans for cutting out residents' energy cost. Earlier, when I was talking to Philip, I told him, look, actually it came from him. He said, when we have such engagements and we have political leadership, speaking, we all know the governor or the president or the minister is not an expert. What you need from us is the leadership and the commitment that, look, we see this as a challenge, we want to address it, and here we have the experts. We have the scientists, we have the Alliance for Science, we have, the builders, we have, and so we're saying this platform is open, we see it as a priority, we want you to tell us, and for us to discuss and for us to design together. And that is why I'd like to quickly introduce members of my executive who are here so that you can know them, get their cards, get their business cards, talk to them after this, and let's work on certain practical things. Kindly, if you work with me at the county government, stand up. Thank you. I'll start like this, from my right. Njenga is my climate advisor, actually, and is working with us both in C40. I'm the vice chair of C40 Cities. I deputize the London mayor. And now we have a co-chair, Aki Sawyer from Freetown. So that is Njenga. He is the expert. He's one of my experts, so please engage with him. We have Malawi from Green Nairobi. That is our sector that deals with environment and climate action. We have Maureen Jerry, also one of my experts. She was the minister in charge of Green Nairobi, but now she's moved to business and hustler opportunities. She's leading the effort in solarization of our markets, making sure we have green markets all across the city, and we're building 20 of them this year, starting in the next few weeks. Thank you, Maureen. We have Ibrahim Auma. Now he is the Minister for Environment for Green Nairobi, and he's really the go-to person. He leads the sector in all our interventions around this topic. It's a coincidence. His chief officer is also Ibrahim Otieno, who's chief officer for Green Nairobi. Patrick Analo is the county secretary. He's the head of our public service in the county government of Nairobi. Behind him is Priscilla Mahinda, who is the chief officer in my office, and also another Priscilla next to her. I think we have a shortage of names in Nairobi County. And she's in charge of the governor's communication unit. Please have your seats. This is a team that I'd love you to engage with, to get to know, and they are available for us. Of course, there's climate, finally. We need you in the built environment, and of course, built environment, more than just housing, gives our people dignity, Our theme is to create a city of order, dignity, hope, and opportunity. Just how the built environment is, gives people a sense of dignity, changes outcomes, reduces, vices. I've seen experiments that have been done. You know about what was done in New York many years ago, with just the painting and fixing broken windows, and crime went down more than 30%, just because people felt, that the environment they're in is dignified, and so they then reciprocated. Hi there. With the dignity. I didn't see. Finally, and as I've said, we need to align, and we need you to align your construction with our climate standards, and to talk to us and with our teams on how we can improve our climate profile. We are measuring emissions throughout the city. We are measuring air quality. We know what the hotspots are, and we have interventions that we think can work. We need to hear your ideas. And all of this we can do, all of this we will do. And I want to repeat what I said earlier. We can have a virtuous cycle of jobs, skills, revenue growth, and environmental responsibility. None takes away from the other. But we need to start building the base of skills and incentives right now. As it happens, and I'm really excited that our partnership with Kenya Green Building Society has already borne fruit. We have completed a preliminary edge building assessment at my office, which we intend to certify in time for COP28, and make it the first edge green green government building in Africa, if not the world. City Hall is going to be that first, green government building, because I believe that if we truly intend to build and rehabilitate greener, more resilient buildings in our cities, we need to lead by example. And as a governor, I must lead by example. I got challenged this morning when I was flagging off the e-mobility vehicles outside City Hall, and a team from the UN. I drove one around. It's really nice, But then the team from the UN showed me the UN resident coordinator's vehicle. Is fully electric. It's quite comfortable. It's an SUV, and so I told my guys, because I don't yet, I haven't yet bought a car, an official car, please make sure it is electric, so that I drive around in an electric car, CS Analo. I hope it's not too expensive, but I think it's worth it to set that example and to make sure it is green, even in color. The second thing to mention is that there will be incentives and opportunities offered by my government for green buildings. And so for the architects coming through our planning system, we're going to offer those incentives, how much you pay. It's going to be cheaper, and in our approval process, we're putting that in our finance bill and in our legislation, because we understand that we need to worry together with you to make possible the green transformation, and we must then be practical in terms of those incentives. So Nasra, where you wear your other hat in the assembly, make sure that clause passes. You guys are doing the finance bill soon. I want to encourage you to teach our young people, because they are the last frontier that we have. We must teach them the skills they will need to succeed in this line of work, and to consider exporting these skills as well. But first, they must be out, to the most vital use and practical use, overseeing the construction of homes and a city we can be proud of. And we've said, part of that, as part of our building code, the need for green spaces. We're not going to approve more concrete jungles in our city. There must be green spaces. There must be those provisions in our plot ratios, and that has gone down in our development control regulations. I could go on highlighting our efforts in Nairobi, but for today, I'd really like to appreciate all of you who have made time to join the Alliance for Science, Kenya Green Building Society, and the government of Kenya in championing our cities and mobilizing finance and partnerships for Africa. I wish you well as you kick off the deliberations, as I also wish the different companies that are going to pitch in our different deal rooms from different parts of Africa to potential supporters and financiers. I really congratulate all of those who have been brave enough to come showcase their projects later in the day. You really are doing us proud in showing the power of our African stories, and I really love what you started with from Thabo Mbeki. You should have seen how President Nelson Mandela was looking at him with such great pride. I think every time I see that, it's really a proud moment to define who we are as Africans. Before I close, really, I just want to mention some of the things we're doing. We are so proud, immensely proud, as part of our climate action, because people don't see it as that. We have allowed others to define to us what is a climate action point. Yet, it is nascent enough for us to actually, based on the outcomes that are really uniquely African, to define what are our climate actions. One of the biggest programs that we're running, which is why I'm wearing this watch, this is Tap to Eat, is our school feeding program. We've built 10 kitchens, green kitchens across the city. We're reducing emissions by making sure that we're locally sourcing the food. We're using briquettes to cook. And every single day in Nairobi, 250,000 children are going to get a meal at less than 4 US cents that has been made in those green kitchens. That is green action. And that is something that needs support. Because really, part of our climate action plan is protection of vulnerable communities, and the ripple effects. That alone creates thousands of jobs directly. Just in the last 12 months that we've been in office, we've been able to create direct 6,000 green jobs, but the ripple effect, the drivers, the people in the markets, comes to close to 300,000. No one counts that. No one, enumerates the value, of that and the impact. Because unless you discuss it in that way, then the people of our cities, of African cities, will again just say, these guys have gone to Nairobi for another high-level talk shop. We must be practical in how we describe what we've done. Sustainable food systems is what we're creating. Part of looking into the future is making sure that the human capital development, of our children, if there's nothing in their stomach, there's nothing that will be in their heads. And what is sad is many times cities are left out of this discussion. All interventions when it comes to hunger are focused in arid areas, yet the urban poor suffer the most. We must build resilient cities, and feeding the children is that. And so, in as much as we've started Africa's largest school feeding program, I'd love to encourage all of you from other African cities to think about it, to work on it. You can imagine the children who are getting 650 grams of a healthy meal are not finishing their meals, they're taking them back home. There is something happening that is not being considered by many of our governments. Of course, as I've mentioned, incentivizing green agriculture, architecture through the permit fees is something that, might look like you're losing out if you have that myopic, view of revenue. But I think that what we save in the long run and what it creates for our, for what we would have needed to spend in the future is an investment. And so we are reducing the permit fees for green architecture and actually making it mandatory for certain aspects to be considered. We are currently renewing 9 estates in Nairobi, which are providing 40,000 housing units. And we're making sure that their energy, they're green in terms of energy-saving fixtures, water-saving fixtures, stormwater drainages, as environmental protection facilities. That is a must. We've told all of those 9 companies that have won the tenders and they've won the bids that this is an irreducible minimum. This must be the character of housing in Nairobi as we move forward. Of course, yes, just clap. You guys, what happened? Thank you. And I hope you guys will come with me for my next meeting down the road. Of course, finally, flood mitigation strategies. We're really working hard. We know El Nino is coming. And so we're focusing on, of course, stormwater drainage, rapid response initiative, clearing all our cities' drainage networks in preparation for the heavy rains, which, of course, are coming as a result of, climate change and as a result of how irresponsible we have been in the past decades. So allow me to finish by really giving you a story of the vision that we have. Because I think, as you said, what has been missing is vision and leadership. I see a Nairobi that is prosperous, a Nairobi that is skilled, a Nairobi in which dignity and opportunity are possessions of every resident of this county. I see a Nairobi that is climate resilient. I want a Nairobi that takes care of its environment. And I hope you're ready to join me and to join us in achieving that vision, not just for our Nairobi, but for our African cities. Lazima iwak. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the sessions. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We are pressed for time, so I apologize. I couldn't shout. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for the vision, but also for the very practical examples that I think everybody has seen that they can connect to, and for availing your office. For also everybody to practically also engage in a way that we can begin to move some of these needles. Again, with your indulgence, Your Excellency, the Governor, the organizers have some gifts that they want to present to you formally, please. And then let me also invite Dr. Chumo. There's also a gift for Her Excellency the First Lady. And then after the gift presentation, if I can have also Somorin and Sheila for the group photo, and then we should let the governor leave. Also, please, Sheila.
Thank you. The gift is on its way. So we always, as we go around the world as Alliance for Science, we take African gifts so that we're able to pass some of our culture and our knowledge to others. So this is an African stool. You know, in Ghana, the stool is a symbol of power. It is the royal stool. It is where the leadership sits. So this is in honor of your leadership and to say that we see what you're doing out there in the world, and often a prophet is not acknowledged in their own home. So we want to take this moment to thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Yes. Sorry, sir. And thank you. Yes, over there. This is for the First Lady, Mama Rachel, who has been an amazing supporter. And I have been working with her on climate action for actually several years, 3 years. We were together at COP26 in Glasgow. We did a high-level panel under the UK presidency, and we talked a lot about financial inclusion, especially for women. Then at COP27, she supported us as well, where we were looking at women and the frontiers of climate change. She has been committed, steady supporter. It's not just talk, it's really action. And when you see the lives of the women, it's extraordinary. So we want to offer this small gift to our late First Lady.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Don't leave. Stay on stage. Dr. Chumo, just hand over the gift. Your Excellency, if I can again request you to stand on stage. Nasra, Somorin, to represent the Africa Development Bank. Official photographers, you have 1 minute. 1 minute. Let me hand over the program back to Nasra. Any direction?
So everyone, please go and have some tea for 15 minutes, and then we come back for now the panel discussions. Thank you so much, and enjoy your coffee before we dive into the serious stuff. Thank you.
2. To set the tone of this panel session, I begin by talking about what our problem is as Africa. Africa has a rapid urbanization and population growth which demands transformative action to position itself and its built environment in a sustainable manner. Never before has there been an urgency for Africa as now. The need for housing across Africa is immediately visible. In virtually every city across the continent, evidence of informal and inadequate housing conditions can be found in the proliferation of informal settlements, slum areas, overcrowding, and African cities are the victim. In Africa, we see among the highest urbanization populations and household growth rates globally. In some cities, as high as 6% per annum. And without the supply of adequate, affordable housing at scale, housing backlogs mean that Africans are living a life of poverty, indignity, and extreme discomfort. Nigeria alone claims a backlog of 17 million units. Kenya has a housing backlog estimated at about 2 million units, which is growing at over 200,000 units per annum, as the formal supply sector fails to meet new family formation. Angola's backlog is also estimated at just under 2 million units and growing at 100,000 units per annum. And yet, despite this known demand, housing as a solution to not just a social challenge, but a financial one, has not been tapped into. And yet, it can act as a financial springboard to micro and medium enterprises and human capital development. For this reason, housing as a part of a bigger built environment ecosystem, especially in cities, presents a unique opportunity. So, with this session, we hope that we'll discuss and promote green and resilient cities as a way of contributing to a better Africa. We also hope to discuss and explore innovative climate finance mechanisms and partnerships. And lastly, we want to conclude on potential next steps and opportunities and the expectation for the week ahead. Allow me to introduce the speakers for purposes of this panel. Wangari Mushiri, who is a director at the Kenya Green Building Society and a director at the Global Wind Energy Council for Africa, or Africa Wind, will be your moderator this morning. Wangari is a passionate sustainability ambassador with renewable energy and green building experience, consulting internationally for various governments, banking, and corporate clients. As a director at the Africa Wind Power, Wangari leads the organization in its objectives to accelerate the deployment of wind power in the African continent. As a director at KGBS, Wangari has provided invaluable support in championing the green building agenda and movement in Africa. Wangari endeavors to achieve the highest quality of service possible while ensuring profit, sustainability, and innovation. Excellent technical communication, leadership, and analytical skills are part of her contribution and impact to the industry. So it gives me great pleasure, and therefore comes to no surprise, that Wangari was recently awarded Insider's Top 10 Women in Climate Leadership in 2023. I could go on and on about Wangari, but I think we're limited on time, so I'll allow her to come in and join us on the stage. Thank you so much. I now want to take this opportunity to welcome an industry shaper and leader, and a proud KGBS Premium member, Acorn Holdings, who is represented today by Sheila Mora, who is their Director for Development Management at Acorn Investment Management Limited. Sheila is the director there and has an integral role at Acorn, which is an integrated real estate company providing the well-known green bond, which helped student accommodation in Kenya as well as Africa as a key guiding factor of green bonds and what they can do in built environment. Sheila is passionate about promoting sustainable development in the built environment and utilizing opportunities in the green space to further grow this in the local context, and has been instrumental in the company portfolio and led the ESG team and championed the Acon's journey of driving a positive impact holistically on the policies and practices of the company and its stakeholders regarding ESG. Sheila was also a board member at the Kenya Green Building Society, so I might be biased, but there's a lot of love for Sheila at KGBS. Without further ado, Sheila, please join us. I now want to also take this opportunity to welcome Azmina Banji, who's the chairperson at the Kenya Green Building Society. Azmina has many hats. Azmina is a developer. She's one of the leading drivers of change at the Kenya Property Developers Association. She also is part of the leading change makers at PDM Holdings Limited. And at KGBS, she's instrumental in helping us with our strategy, key stakeholder engagement, and has many years under her belt as a key built environment shaper and leader. Azmina is a woman of many strengths, but today I'm hoping to utilize her for our panel. Azmina, over to you. I now want to move on to the next speaker, who's from AU NEPAD, but I'm not too sure if our speaker made it. So you'll indulge me if he hasn't, because unfortunately accreditation was an issue till last evening. So Mr. Ibra Wahabu, I don't know if Ibra is around. If you are, please raise your hand. Well, it's unfortunate. But Ibra sends his regards from South Africa. And last but not least, we're also supposed to have representation for the Ministry of Housing through the Housing Secretary, Mr. Said Athman. And so I just wanted to confirm if we have anyone from the Ministry of Housing here. Well, the show must go on. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Nazra. Thank you. Really appreciate your warm invitation onto the stage. And filling your shoes is not going to be easy. I think for gender parity, I am going to invite a gentleman from the African Development Bank. Funso, please join us on stage to discuss climate finance. I know I've just sprung this on you. What are friends for? It's only fair. Thank you. Great. So as you can tell, we'll have to do a bit of remixing today, but thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us, Funso. And I know you have a panel right after this as well, so we will give you a much better introduction. But thank you for joining us from the African Development Bank. Is it still morning? Good morning. Yes? Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here and really discuss this very exciting topic on how partnership and finance can really enable us to unlock opportunities in the built environment, and how we can create urban jungles that really contribute to nature and contribute to our environment by making them better, and also making our livelihoods, how we live in these buildings, because we spend 99% of our time in buildings. So are they making us better? So I think it's important that I ask the panelists you've already been introduced, you can give us just one comment or one statement around partnerships and finance in regard to the built environment. So over to you, Sheila.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sorry to hijack your panel. The Architectural Association of Kenya's Vice President, George Arabu, will be joining this panel to give the industry perspective. So sorry, guys, it's a bit of a spinner, but I think it'll keep things spicy. So George Arabu, please join us. Thank you so much for being on sport. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome, George.
I think we were sufficiently introduced by Nasra, but I think to just maybe give context to the conversations we're about to have is just the importance of concerted efforts in making green financing and in making sustainability financing a reality for many organizations. Because I feel like it's something that we talk about as something to be achieved by many people or many organizations in the space and in the built environment, but we don't have the ways and the hows and the policies and just the practical instruments in place. So I think in terms of this conversation, it's how do we then make it more practical? What do we implement? How do we take advantage of partnerships, and actually utilize those to be able to enable most of the organizations to access green financing?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sheila. Over to you, Azmina.
Thank you, Wangari. I guess I will just say it from the perspective of, no one person can do it alone, right? I mean, first of all, the built environment itself is very complex. There's a lot of technical requirements, professional requirements, hands-on skills, and then to top that up with financing and then sustainability on top of that, it really takes a spectrum of skills to make something work and work efficiently. So yes, collaboration and partnerships are critical to make a success out of it, and especially when time is limited and you can't learn it all yourself and you can't learn to do it all yourself. So absolutely, we've got to have partners and collaborations to make this work.
Yes, absolutely. And Funso, coming to you, I really want to touch on some of the challenges you think we're facing in terms of unlocking this big opportunity of urbanization in a sustainable way, in a green way that is better for the environment and better for our livelihoods.
Great. Thank you for the last-minute invitation to this panel. Olufunso Shomarin, Regional Head of Climate Change for East Africa, African Development Bank. I think one important point that we should all remind ourselves that if there's any sector out there that combines the best of mitigation and adaptation together, it's a built environment. Because while on the one hand, you have to seriously think about how the next set of buildings are going to be energy efficient, very green in the notion of climate mitigation, but the next set of buildings themselves must be able to withstand the impact of climate change. So they must be at best both resilient, but also at best green in a way of low emissions. And that is an entry point to the world of opportunity for scaling finance in that direction. Whether it's a mitigation finance or adaptation finance, I think the green space, the built environment can really take advantage of that. How do we unlock finance? It comes down to the question that the previous speakers have answered, and that's the power of partnership. Let me say this, money moves in 3 directions. Number 1, money moves in the direction of solvable problem. Number 2, money moves in the direction of capacity and capability. And number 3, money moves in the direction of partnership and trust. Money is not money. Money is a trust element. And I think as you begin to think about opportunities within country, but also globally, we begin to see where are those spaces to build new partnership, but even sometimes to strengthen existing partnerships. It's not all the time that we need to build new things. Sometimes spaces to do that. So what the bank does is to be able to recognize the principles, the power, but also the agency that different partners bring to the table, and see how do we use our resources as a catalytic fund to be able to unlock that pool of capital that we need. I'll keep it there for now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Funso. I really appreciate the comments. And as he's already touched on, partnership is key, and money flows in the direction of partnership and trust. So, George, I want to come to you. At AAK, you have a lot of partners, members, people that you collaborate with, your own team in the Secretariat. How are you finding that, even collaborating with government and other stakeholders, how are you unlocking those partnerships? And how are you educating the masses in regard to sustainable buildings, green buildings, resilience, adaptation, as Funso has touched on?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. So the architecturalization of Kenya is an umbrella body of 8 different professions. At the onset, the idea was that all building projects are actually done as a partnership to begin with, and it's important to have everyone on the table at the point at which you are taking off. And one of the things we've realized at the association is that the most sustainable way to start these processes is to have the local mobilizing of local support. And the local support is basically the people who are the beneficiaries, the main stakeholders, the main actors. And the moment even one of them is left out, it slows down the process. And so at the association, really, the idea that we need to start at the point of everyone is on the table, let's listen to everyone before we even do the first step. That in itself gives us that kind of a strength and that belief that it can be done. But at the moment, the biggest challenge, of course, we have is in matters of regulation, particularly government bodies, because government works differently. So what we have is a little of what we'd call representation from our institution. But we know, of course, with the bureaucracies, especially in government, there is something that needs to be worked on, and it's work in progress, but moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. Thank you for your comments, George. And I think you're absolutely right. Having everybody at the table is important right from the beginning. One of the things I want to come back to you, Sheila, on is Akon raised the first green bond in Kenya, which is no easy feat. I think we, even having conversations with you earlier, when you look at the reporting that goes behind it, even to qualify the compliance around that, it's really important that you have key people at the table right from the beginning so that the planning happens properly. Can you talk us through a bit about that? What was that process like, raising the first green bond in Kenya? What challenges did you have to overcome? Where did you have to innovate? And what partnerships did you have to come up with to ensure that it was a successful bond?
Thanks, Wangari. So let me just start from the very beginning. A green bond is basically a fixed financial instrument that supports projects that have positive environmental benefits. And so Akon is a vertically integrated firm. We develop, we manage, and we own real estate, focusing on rental housing now. And currently, as Nazra had said earlier, we're focusing on student accommodation, purpose-built student accommodation under the brand names Square 2 and Kijani. So if I can just circle back a bit onto how the process was like. Raising green bonds is, should I say, it should be an easy way, of being able to access green and sustainable financing. However, it being still very nuanced in our context was not easy for us. So if I can just quickly walk us through the process, the basics still have to be met. It's just like any vanilla bond. The only difference is that you're raising funds to have to finance projects with positive environmental impact. When the built estate in real estate, so our starting point was to first have our entire portfolio certified under the IFC Edge platform. So I won't go into that because I know there are conversations about Edge and there will be on that later on, but it's basically to ensure that our entire portfolio is able to deliver on energy efficiency, on water efficiency, and that we're also utilizing materials that have a lower embodied energy. So based on that, having the portfolio already certified, we then now looked around in terms of how can we be able to, to partner with the regulators, to partner with our investors, to partner, with everyone who we're working with, even our consultants, as he said, the engineers, the architects in the association, to just be able to make this a reality. And once the design had been certified as being green, we then looked around, because for you to be able to raise a green bond, it must be certified. And so we then, scoured the universe for who would be able to certify this, and we were able to work with the CBI, the Climate Bonds Initiative, that certifies the bonds. So that's just the very first step. Once your basics are in place in terms of the organization, the financial bits, the business case, we got the portfolio certified, we got the bond certified by CBI. But after that, green bonds have various principles for you to be able to actually raise green bonds. So there's 4 green bond principles. Selection of projects. They have to meet, again, a certain number of issues. And for us, IFC Edge was the certifying benchmark for the portfolio. The next thing is selection of projects, and then your reporting framework. which Wangare, you mentioned a bit, and then also the management of proceeds. So once we're able to check all those elements, then we're able to raise a bond. But that's now the very first step. The bond was raised in 2020. It's now about 4 or 5 years. We're actually retiring the bond next year. So inbuilt into the process is now the reporting framework, which has to be certified by a third party. And so initially when we went in, once you have IFC Edge and you have CBI, we thought that would be sufficient, but then you have to now inbuild third-party verification, for what are you actually doing? How are you actually utilizing the process? And the reporting framework is also based on quarterly reports, through lenders' technical advisors and third-party audits and third-party verification. So it's basically a very, if I could put it, it's a very intentional, process to be able to go through the green bond. But once you have all the basics in, it's now how do you institutionalize reporting and the green bond reporting framework into the business, which we have been able to do. And it's a journey. We all start small and we keep building on it as we go along. When we began in 2019, there are very many nuances, and we're like, okay, so this has to be done. Who certifies this? Who's doing this? But then as you go along the journey, you're able to create partnerships that have been extremely instrumental for us, and they've been critical for our success. And if I can just go back again and circle back on partnerships. So what we did is that we had to get a lot of support, and first of all, locally from the regulators, from CMA, from the Kenya Bankers Association, for them to be able to walk with us and to work with us in terms of implementing this, and how then do we actually reach the reporting milestones and the reporting elements that come along with it. The other thing is, that was the first green bond that we're issuing, in sub-Saharan Africa. And so you should also be able to attract investors to be able to come through. And so we also had to partner with Garantco, who guaranteed the bond, to 50%. And just the aspect of the bond being guaranteed was able to expose us, to more international players, to more international investors and funders. And that has really, been instrumental in just increasing our investor base. If I could just go to lessons learned, the first one would be, it has to be a concerted effort. And I think for us in this room, because we have a focus on green, it's just to realize that we have to carry along, all our other partners who are within the built industry. So you have to carry along your financiers, you have to carry along your technical people, the engineers, the architects, you have to carry along, the bankers, you have to carry along the regulators, and then walk through that journey. And for us, what really marked the success of the ACON bond was really leveraging, on those partnerships and being able to see, we can be able to do this, where we're able to get a skill that maybe was not locally available, and then partner with people to be able to do that. The second thing that we've learned, green bonds are supposed to be cheap, but they're actually not cheap, So it's still a journey that we're trying to work through. We raised it as a fixed instrument at 12.25%, but then just the reporting framework and all the processes that underlay, you being able to prepare a bond and being able to, successfully float it are quite expensive. So for us, the cost was, was high, but then the benefits far outweigh the cost. And I think sometimes that's the curse of the pioneer, because when you go in, you're the one to make the way and, to try to figure out how this thing needs to look like. But then beyond that, it's the benefits that come with it. And for us, the greatest benefit is that once we raised the green bond locally, we were able to cross-list this, in London. And what that automatically did for ACON as an organization is that it put us, on the international map. And so organizations are able to come and see, okay, we want to partner with you, we want to invest in what you're doing. And so that has given us a very broad, wide-based level of investors, which has also helped ACON scale up. When we began in 2019, we had 2 operating properties at the time. Now we've got 8 operating properties and about 15,000 beds under development. And this really has just been, because of the sheer impact of scale, because of being able to access all these developers. And I think the last thing that I'll say is that you have to be intentional. Sometimes things just don't happen, and we walk in this journey and we're like, it's a green bond you're raising, you do a check the box kind of exercise, but that doesn't work out, So it's in terms of being intentional, ensuring the portfolio indeed is green. And for us, once we got the initial IFC Edge certification, you get your certificates. But then beyond that, we still have, the third-party verification who come to check, are the buildings really sustainable? Show us what your carbon footprint looks like. Show us what you're doing beyond this. And I think for us in this room, beyond the green conversation then is to start to step into the social and the sustainability elements of this conversation. So for us, I would say that has been the journey. Lots of lessons along the way, but really critical for success was the partnerships that were established and just being intentional through the entire journey. It's made us as an organization much better because we were now able to get into the REITs place,
Right.
because the foundations had been set.
And it's great to hear that, Sheila. I think all the innovation you've talked about, all the intentionality behind this green bond and the products that you're putting out to society, it really shows in when you go to Ukwetu or you go to one of the your buildings, you can actually see the difference. I want to come to you, Esmina, because Sheila has touched on innovation and being intentional. And I think we've not, on this panel yet, really talked about what it means to build with nature and to build for a society that is more sustainable. Maybe you can shed some light around that. And then, in addition to that, also Sheila touched on being, green bonds are meant to be cheap, right? And we know this is the case across all financing, that it's never as cheap as you really thought it could be. How do we make it, and as a developer, this is now wearing your developer hat, how do you think we can really help unlock cheaper finance or find a way to innovate around these financing mechanisms so that we can easily, have cheaper products out into the market?
Thank you, Wangari, and Sheila's going to be a really hard act to follow, but I'm going to try my best. So let's start with building with nature, right? The obvious is, locally sourced, sustainable, and hopefully circular building materials, right? Rammed earth, sun-dried bricks, and timber, for instance, right? A natural material that I'm actually convinced mass timber is going to be the building material of the future, right? So those are some of the obvious things that you can look at, right, when you're building with nature. But then again, there's building components that you can incorporate, like green walls and green roofs. You can look at, rain gardens or ways of doing wetlands conservation and soil conservation. But really also, like, the simple planting of trees, right, on your property as you're doing development. I mean, there are parts of the world where this is a precondition to development approval, is that you are going to plant X number of trees on your property to get approval to build your house or your apartment building. Something like that would go a long ways. We talk about urban forests, for instance. This could become a scattered urban forest. The other thing is there's this concept of the 15-minute city. So when you're talking about sustainability, the built environment obviously is cities, right? And sustainable and just cities where you have green, affordable, dignified housing, where you have services and amenities, non-motorized transport, public transport, renewable energy, and everything is within like a 15-minute transit, whether it's walking or, by hopefully clean-fueled vehicles, right? So I think those are some of the ways that we can address the building with nature component of this. And honestly, research has indicated that nature-based solutions can contribute up to 30% of our need for climate mitigation by 2050. And this came from the World Wildlife Fund. And then going to the financing part of it. So I'm going to give you, first of all, really quickly, our experience as a developer. I work for PDM Kenya, which is an affiliate of the Aga Khan Development Network. And one of our mandates when we do development is that we have to ensure both social and economic impact. We struggled with affordable housing for several years. We were trying to get involved in the government's affordable housing program, just could never make the numbers work. Unfortunately for us, even though we're part of the AKDN, we're actually a for-profit institution with a board of directors to report to who have a hurdle rate that we have to achieve, and we just couldn't do it. I think to do affordable housing affordably, we're going to have to seriously look at, again, a green supply chain that's local. We're going to have to start identifying and enabling local supply chains to deliver the materials, because that's part of the biggest cost of housing. We're also going to have to look at incentives. We've had conversations with the government, and there was a draft green incentives policy that was circulated for review. We're going to need to find ways to incentivize developers to build green. Whether it's, again, like was announced by the governor, waiving of statutory approval fees, or even a discount on those fees, or rebates, or tax incentives. I know there's already a tax incentive for affordable housing from a VAT perspective, but all of these things have to be considered. Again, going back to your collaboration and partnership conversation.
Great. I absolutely agree, and it was great to see this morning the governor announce certain incentives, such as lowering the costs of the permit, which I think is going to be great. Now, I actually want to hear from the audience after this, but I have a question for Funso. When we're talking about financing and coming to financing green, affordable housing, carbon credits is starting to come into play, and in two ways. One, if we're trying to have affordable housing, cooking. 900 million people, you told me this, 900 million people don't have access to clean cooking. And this is such a crucial component of our living. And most of the times, let's say, when someone's cooking, there's a child nearby, right? So indoor air quality, I think the governor also touched on this earlier this morning. It's so important that we look at all those components. In addition to that, how can the buildings be carbon sinks? How can cities be carbon sinks? And that's a big opportunity in terms of carbon credits. So I want you to touch around that conversation on whether carbon credits really can play in the space, what role it would play, and any other innovative financing mechanisms that you would know.
Thank you. And I'm very mindful of time, because carbon credit it's a beautiful chaos, if I may say, because the prospects of it, but then it's not as easy as it looks. So first, it's important to understand the global order when it comes to finances. All we are trying to do, with our new instrument, new partnership, is basically in Africa to move money from where it is most abundant, perhaps less needed, to where it is most needed and less abundant. So all of our thinking, all of our ideas is to be able to create the facilitative modality in order to move and do transfer of resources, because there's a huge demand in this part of the world. Unfortunately, there's a very decreased supply, and so carbon market becomes one of those innovations. So basically, you're saying there's an opportunity to be part of a global solution, and there has to be a compensation mechanism for that. And the opportunities across multiple sectors, energy, and again, I'll come back to the fact that the built environment converge at a point where it brings all of these sectors together. So whether it is in water conservation, whether it is in architectural design, whether it's in energy efficiency, whether it's in waste management, circular economy, that is the power of a central platform. And that is the good thing about this. Now, when it comes to the specific details of carbon markets, what I think is very important is for us to be able to integrate ideas of projects. So you don't just look at clean cooking just for the sake of clean cooking. Should you do clean cooking and potentially sell the credit against business as usual? But think of that clean cooking with energy efficiency in a house. So the project becomes a house that as opposed to cooking. Does that make sense? Because then we will be able to aggregate the quantum of credit that will be sufficient enough to trigger the flow of capital that we need. So in our case, we're now looking about nature-based solutions, integrating that into a housing component. The clean cooking part, integrating that, the energy efficiency and all of that. Now, and that sounds very easy and fixable, but why is it not happening? Because there's a complexity behind the whole idea around verification, additionality, third-person monitoring, and then you have to wait. So what we are doing at the bank is basically to create a facility. And we are actually creating what we call carbon support facility for Africa. And we are looking at two levels. So the first one is help countries develop the policies that will provide incentives to go in this direction of think of a house as a system. A sustainable house. The second thing is then to come down to project developers like yourself
and like Akon, and I'm really, it's really very saddening to hear that it was very expensive, because a lot of the upfront costs could have been paid for by grants. And I'm hoping that we can talk about that bilaterally. But then create a facility that would help you to de-risk market, getting into the market, but also helping you to move at scale, to operate at scale. So if you think about what Cocoa Networks is doing, they are doing it within the sector of individual women, households, and that. Now, is it possible to aggregate that together with other similar projects, nature and the likes, and have something very substantial? So if there's a policy framework that provides the space for that, we are happy to support that. And look, this is already happening. Rwanda is having something called the Green Kigali City. And it's basically looking into the carbon project as a system, as opposed to fragmenting them into individual sectoral projects rather than as a system project. And by doing that, you're able to have the quantum, and obviously people can see the value of that. The second thing is carbon credit or carbon revenue must not be the primary source of your revenue. It cannot work, and we need to be very honest. So whatever you're doing, whether it's a student accommodation, the revenue, the business itself, on a risk perspective, should be able to be profitable without carbon revenue, hopefully, or even to break even. Then carbon revenue becomes an additional revenue, because carbon revenue is a behavior revenue. You have to stick to a certain behavior for a long period of time. And so what the bank is doing is to look at those entry points and to be able to see how do we come in to support that, and particularly to support scale. It's a learning by doing. I don't think anyone gets it right, but I think it's good to commend the work that's been done in Kenya. For many of you who may not know, 25% of all carbon credit from Africa are actually here in Kenya. But we also need to do something differently. Those carbon credits are coming from only 17 developers, project developers. We need to expand that and bring in more local developers into that. And what we're looking at the facility is to be able to see how do we solve those pieces of problem together, not in silos, but in an integrated manner. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Funso. And I think it's great already to see some partnerships forming on the stage as we speak, and this is the essence of this panel. But George, I want to come to you and just ask you, Funso has talked about this carbon support facility that they're putting together. How do we get your members and the architects, the developers, all the people who you work with, how do we get them interested in such a facility? And in addition to that, how do we ensure that, as you said, it can't be your primary revenue, but we want, looking at the green design principles that have informed the affordable housing development framework. Funso also touched on policy. How do we ensure that policy really is an enabling environment for your members to be able to really take on this opportunity that has been presented?
Thank you. Let me just state first that I think Africa, we are inherently green, yeah? Because of economic reasons. If someone will recycle a bottle of juice, not because they cannot afford to buy another one. And unfortunately, as we urbanize, we become less and less green because we have a better purchasing power. So now how do we mitigate that kind of a growth towards being wasteful and maintain our, very, green way of living? In most urban areas in Kenya, and I think it's true globally, I think 90% of buildings are actually houses. So essentially, if we tackle the issue of housing, we will have addressed a very major part of the urban climate challenges. Now, in terms of how we, our members, rather the consultants or the professionals work, we depend a lot on the goodwill of the people, because we work with the clients. They come to us and they give us a brief what they want, and we work with regulators like government to be able to develop the right thing. Interestingly, because of the challenges of funding money, and I'm glad we're talking about money here, because without money we can't build. But the question is how much money? And the other thing is that what is affordable housing? Because I design houses, and a lot of times we have not defined affordable, because affordability will be based on who the target is. A lot of Kenyans are living somewhere, whether it's under a tent or under a tree. That's what they can afford currently. If we investigate that, then when we as designers come in, we are making that housing dignified. But if someone else defines what affordable is, and unfortunately that's what's happening, and it's bankers, carbon credits are being defined from somewhere else, okay? We who are inherently green, ideally should have more carbon credits than the people who are causing climate, So all these issues are affected because when I design, I have this challenge of someone else telling me what affordability is, but the person I'm designing for has a very different perspective of what affordability is. I'll give you an example of some associations we've worked with during the disaster management. They're reconstructing houses for people, and they use a budget of 200,000 to build a 35 square meter house for most people. If I tell a banker 200,000 is enough to build for someone a house, they'll tell me I'm crazy. Because affordability is being defined, I think right now with the government affordable housing, it's in the range of 1 million shillings to 2 million shillings. So the other thing I want to speak to, please, just quickly is, it was mentioned by an earlier speaker about table banking, about aggregating, and I think you just mentioned the small monies that Kenyans have. We never used to have issues of homelessness because people did not have to have money to build. Communities came together, they collected locally available materials, there were local hands ready to come and help you build. If we aggregate the little monies that we have, small monies with women doing table banking, and pulling it to one person at a time, we can be able to build for everyone. And that's why, for example, the current taxation regime on housing, if it is well utilized, because the main thing has to be about the system. If the money is efficiently utilized, it will take time, but everyone will eventually get a home. And that is how African culture is. We don't have to have a lot of money, we don't have to get a lot of money from abroad for us to ensure that everyone has a house. And unfortunately, we as professionals have been pulled in on the issues of financing. Because the biggest challenge is people wake up, I dreamt that I want to build a house in Nairobi, and it has to look like a house in New York. And then I get consultants, I start building, I run out of money, and then I go home and I leave it dead there. So how do we make sure we live within our means, but then sharing in such a way that we be patient, okay? If you are patient, with proper plans, with proper systems, it's possible to even create our own carbon credit markets. Why does it have to be defined by someone else who already has the money and we don't?
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much, George, and great to hear about, I'm not blaming anybody on the panel, but I think it's important that we talk and collaborate and we'll come up with those great solutions. I've been given the signal for time because we're trying to make sure that we catch up with our program today. So unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions, but please do pull the panelists over lunch, talk to them, ask them hard questions, and let's also hope, and I think all of us have to be held accountable, that this new housing levy that you mentioned is also going to green buildings and housing for everybody. And I think that's very, very important because it comes from each and every single one of our paychecks. Thank you to my amazing panelists. Some last minute, I really appreciate it. And those who were there before, I really appreciate your time and your comments. And we look forward to a great discussion in the next panel. Nazra, over to you.
So thank you so much, everyone. So you've heard from the industry, you've heard from AFDB, you've heard from champions in the industry. Now we want to summon the CEOs and the financiers because, well, we want to understand what is this issue about unlocking bankability, ESG. Many words are being thrown around in the sustainability space. But we're hoping that once we hear from CEOs and financiers, some of your questions will be answered. So in this session, the second panel this morning, we're talking about ESG and sustainable finance, where the question we're seeking to answer is, how can ESG be used as a tool to build climate resilience in Africa? And I think for us, as we were crafting this question for this conversation, we wanted to understand if we were to look at the built environment as an ecosystem of opportunities, especially from a financing perspective, it's important to know that the week ahead, starting today, presents an opportunity for African states to highlight their ambitions for Africa. Yet, ambition and action are two different things. Ambition is everywhere. Governments and businesses around the world have set their targets towards net zero and other ambitious targets. They have vowed to fight social injustices, environmental injustices, and that's fine. Vowing is fine. But what we want to do and see is implementation. So whilst ambition is important, what the world really needs is more action. And time is running out, as Dr. Sheila aptly said. We have less than a decade to reach the initial Paris Agreement goals of 50% emissions reduction by 2030, and the fuse is much, much shorter on some of the social challenges that our continent is faced with. So in this regard, we hope to unpack what ESG means for Africa and the climate financing conversation in practical terms. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our distinguished panel, starting with Mr. John Bosco Kalisa, who is the CEO at the East African Business Council. Mr. Kalisa brings a wealth of experience in promoting the private sector development and competitiveness in the EAC, having spent over 20 years in various roles championing the business community involvement in the EAC regional integration agenda. John is an economist by profession with extensive experience in research, analysis, and private sector engagement. He has extensive knowledge in global trade negotiations and deep networks with international development partners. So grab him close, right? Including the USAID, Korea International Cooperation Agency, Japan International Cooperation Agency, AFDB, World Bank, Trademark East Africa, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome John Bosco Kalisa, the CEO of EAC. Next, I'd like to introduce you all to the CEO, the Group CEO of the African Guarantee Fund, Mr. Jules Nganka. Jules has over 15 years of experience in banking and financial services with leading financial institutions. Prior to his current role, he was the Group Deputy CEO of African Guarantee Fund. Jules has worked over 8 years at Barclays Capital, the investment banking division of Barclays PLC, in various roles, including rates strategist, rates trader, treasury vice president. In his latest position, he focused on the management of the group's liquidity, interest rates risk, and foreign exchange risk in their balance sheet, and the implementation of their internal funding curves and transfer pricing. Of the Private Infrastructure Development Group, Philippe has over 30 years of international experience in emerging markets, infrastructure projects, and export finance and risk management in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. Prior to joining PIDGE, Philippe was one of the founding partners of an EM infrastructure finance advisory firm, and before that, worked for DEPFA Bank's infrastructure finance unit. Philippe spent 13 years at the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, World Bank Group, in Washington and Singapore, where he headed the guarantees department and was the global head of infrastructure. Philippe's infrastructure experience covers power, renewables, water, transportation, and social infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Philippe. And last but not least, I'd like to reintroduce Dr. Funzo Omosomarin, who is once again championing the AFDB's voice in this panel. Funzo, first and foremost, is a friend of KGBS, who is championing not just the African agenda, but the youth agenda in many industry-shaping conversations. Funzo is an Eisenhower Fellow I hope I got that right. Yes? Thank you. And has taken a key role in shaping climate policies and green growth policies in Africa. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome Funzo. And of course, last but not least, myself as your moderator. So I think I'll start off with a few opening remarks to give you a minute each to tell me what are your hopes for the coming week. I'll start with you, Dr. John Bosco.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I want to thank and appreciate my sister here for inviting us to share the insight and excitement, by the way, for the government of Kenya and people of Kenya to host this event. So as the East African Business Council, we are the regional apex body representing interests, aspirations, and needs of the private sector. And our role is to improve business environment across EAC. But now we're also talking about continental free trade area, where we are looking beyond EAC to look into the entire continent. How do we work together? How do we build and sustain the partnership? So this event comes at the right time. It comes at the right time, and we are very excited. So my expectation, again, there are two things. One, forging strategic partnership. Two, making it clear, clarity in terms of what we call stakeholders, management and engagement. Because when we talk about sustainability, it is very important that we bring everyone, including our communities, to understand and appreciate the needs and interests of sustainability. So that partnership is very critical in terms of building resilience, but also in terms of building a recovery of our economies. So let us not leave anyone behind. Let's bring the voice of our communities. Let's bring the voice of our policymakers. Let's bring the voice of the private sector into the discussion that is happening from today, tomorrow, and the day after.
Thank you. Over to you, Jules.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Jules Ngankam. I'm the CEO of the African Guarantee Fund. So what we do, we offer product to the risk, the exposure that the bank are taking when they finance like any kind of project. Yeah. So my hope for this week is mainly to see how do we involve the financial sector, because we can talk all day long about various projects, about what we have to do in terms of sustainability, but at the end of the day, what is important is to have investors that are willing to finance this type of project. And in Africa, the main source of financing remain the commercial bank. So the commercial bank are still the one that finance various projects in the continent up to 90%. Now we have other sources of financing, but the commercial bank, they remain the primary source of financing. So how do we involve the financial sector? How do we make sure that they are part of the trend and they are willing to support those type of projects? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Philippe, over to you for your opening expectation.
Thank you, Nazra, and thank you very much for inviting me. My key expectation or hope would be that enough talking, it's time to act. I've attended a few COPs, as I'm sure many of you in the room have, and I hate to be brutal about it, but very often you come away from the COP meetings feeling like you witnessed a lot of blah, blah. We're beyond that if you look at the urgency and the emergency. So for me, this is a call to action, and I hope to see two things. At past events, whether it's COP or precursors leading up to COP, which is what this is, I haven't seen countries on this continent necessarily speaking with one voice. I am seeing it today in a way that I certainly didn't see it a year ago, and certainly not 2 years ago. That has to be the approach if we're going to have meaningful change. The other thing would be to begin to, as we do in our new strategy that we launch, obsessed about localization of solutions. You heard from Shayla a moment ago about Acorn and the success story. And I'll come back to Acorn because she, I think, underplays the success story that Acorn and the Green Bond is for Kenya and could be for the rest of the continent. So for me, obsessing about localization of deliverables or mechanisms, for me, that will be the key thing.
Thank you so much. But last but not least, you, Finzo.
Great. You know, the initial name of this summit was Africa Climate Action Summit. And I think the key word is action. And definitely this is something I would really love to see. And one key action will be in the space of finance. We are all bankers, most of us are. And the notion of finance is just for us and everyone within this summit to understand that money is not necessarily scarce. Money is just unevenly distributed. And it's a very powerful thing because you can easily believe the notion that money is scarce. Money is not there. But money is there. It's just not evenly distributed. How do we build that partnership to bring money closer? I hate to use the word money, finance, closer to where the needs are, especially in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now that you've set the tone of your expectation, I think I will start with you, Philippe. As a global player who's making enormous, strides to drive both government and private sector impact, could you maybe tell us what, or highlight maybe what initiatives you've made or committed to with respect to Africa and just globally?
Well, we've just launched our strategy, which by no accident will run till 2030. And although we've always looked at the environment and climate as a central plank of the strategy, it sits front and center today. And so whether it's climate resilience mitigation, anything that we do, any project that comes through the system will be looked at through that lens. And to give you an example, in a different country, in Madagascar, they've had 4 typhoons since the beginning of the year, unheard of for Madagascar. So we supported a developer with a 25 megawatt solar power plant. The poles that hold the solar panels are dug into the ground 3 meters. And there's a reason for that, because if you have typhoons, those panels will withstand the force of the typhoon. So that's resilient infrastructure. But let's bring it closer to home here in Nairobi in Kenya. When we worked with Shayla and Acorn, and I think we cannot underestimate the impact of the first green bond with a dual listing in Nairobi and London Stock Exchange. It's extremely powerful, first time ever. But we were talking about cost, and Shayla was talking about the cost of financing earlier. Let's remember that since that bond issuance 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and if you speak to the CMA, they'll provide more details, you've had 6 other bonds come through the system. Some of them unguaranteed, which means the cost has come down. And that means you begin to think about how you create that secondary market for that bond issuance. So on the back of that, and on the back of our experience in Nigeria, for example, we're looking to set up in Kenya what we call a credit enhancement facility, essentially a domestic entity, privately run, that will be properly rated. And we've obviously worked with the regulators, with CMA and others, that will provide guarantees to domestic bond issuance in Kenya to attract institutional investors. It could be asset managers, it could be pension funds, it could be insurance companies. So essentially, take what we did with Acorn and go in overdrive and have the wherewithal to be able to raise that kind of finance in the domestic market.
Thank you so much. John, over to you. So as an economist by training, I'm curious to understand, or rather, tell us, in Africa, where the drivers are SMEs, I think we've had this conversation before, but generally, in Africa, the key drivers are SMEs. So how can we ensure ESG actually works for SMEs? Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about sustainability, people imagine, well, it's not for SMEs. What are your thoughts on that? And are there any challenges so far?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think when we talk about SMEs, generally we always call them MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises. 90% of our business fall under that categories of MSMEs. And these are the big contributors to our GDP. Generally, when you look at the ESC and the entire Africa, they contribute almost 60% in terms of GDP, in terms of employment creation. So I think I always use what I call 3 I's. 3 I's is the interests, institutions, and incentives. These are very, very paramount. That any design, as we talk about sustainability, any design of a project, you must ensure that you've understood the interests, the incentives, and the institution. When we talk about the institution, we're talking about legal and regulatory framework in which these SMEs operate. I think one of my sister in the previous discussion, we sometimes in Africa grab things from the top without going down to the bottom. And I think that we need a kind of a paradigm shift so that before even we talk about financing for who? Financing for what? Right? So that interest, that integration of the needs, especially for SMEs, is very paramount. You mentioned about urbanization, rural-urban migration, that is what is happening. First, you need to understand the segment of the people you are going to serve, of the companies you are going to serve, in terms of the configuration, in terms of the scale, in terms of the scope, in terms of the needs, their interest. So coming to that, I think where I stand, and as East African Business Council, we always need to look at the legal environment, the operating environment in which these SMEs operate. When I was coming, I came this morning from Uganda, and I was looking at Steve Jobs. He mentioned that if you want to be innovator, you have to stay hungry, and you have to look foolish, because you need to tighten your belt and you do things differently. And I think that's what we need as Africa, as East Africa. We need to really tighten our belt, because sometimes we talk about issues in a kind of a global scale, but we need to cascade it down to the individual level to understand what our needs, what our interests, do we have the enabling institution in terms of addressing these issues. So as we discuss, I think it is very paramount we reflect on that. We reflect on what are we serving. Is it an issue of finance? And again, when we talk about financing, we need to de-risk our business. We need to de-risk our continent, because there is that perception, including our good banks, African Development Bank. When you tell them to lend to SMEs, they say, no, we cannot deal with the SMEs. So we need to have products that are suitable to the needs of our business. And I think that is very critical in understanding the needs, interests, and institutions to support this sustainability. And I think that's where I wanted to dwell on. But more importantly is the issue of skills, capability, and capacity. We need to raise awareness, and I'm happy we are working together. We need to, when we are talking about green building, we are talking about green bonds, we need to bring the community, we need to bring these SMEs into the limelight and of understanding what do we talk. Even the language itself, we need to simplify it, make it clear for the users in order to appreciate the needs and their interests. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. So over to you, Funzo, because he's mentioned AFDB, so I'm curious. So often, and I'll say this is the perception that's out there, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. So some Pan-Africans will say that ESG is the new form of neocolonialism. It's what they say. I'm just the mouthpiece. But what are your thoughts on this? Because, ultimately, sometimes it could be a perception. And I think it's important for people to feel that they're part of the conversation. And sometimes maybe this perception is because they don't feel their voices are included. So what are your initiatives as a FDB to make it inclusive? And anything else really you want to say? Thank you.
Thank you. The hardest part of my job is always to defend the bank, particularly when there are questions about SMEs and unlimited flows of financing. Nazra, thank you. And I think the question about ESG is a very strategic one, because ESG could represent three things. So number one, as a paradigm shift, the old notion that whatever is good for the society is good for the business. It could also be a framework, ability to articulate what strategic direction a company is taking, how you see issues, what I would see as a cost, you may see it as an incentive. So it comes down to your framing of issues. And that is the power of ESG as well. And the last point is ESG could be as a tool. It could become the operational tool of how do we do things. And so what we've done in the bank and our approach as well, you will probably never see ESG on our website or have us talk about it. But what we see it as a shift is more as an opportunity to use it to bring in and integrate all other domains of interest. So whether it's climate domain, climate interest, or even circular economy interest, or even finance interest, there's that opportunity of bringing those different domains of interest into ESG. And so for us at the bank, we're very big on circular economy. And we've been able to look into what our businesses are doing. So first, on the one hand, you're looking into how our business integrating circular issues in their operations. And how do we use financial incentives to push them in the direction where they can do more? So basically, pushing somebody in the direction of scale and speed by putting financial resources in place, mostly grant resources. The other thing is also to help countries understand that there's a massive opportunity in the world of green finance. And so think of green finance as an opportunity where you're knocking doors. And in the African context, you need multiple hands knocking on multiple doors at the same time. So it wouldn't just be one person, AFDB or AGF, knocking on the door and then expecting whatever they get to give it to everybody. Rather, you want to create multiple opportunities for multiple hands to knock on multiple doors. So in ESG is a language that harmonizes all of those hands together. And then by getting into that green finance space, or also some organizations will need support in how do we then do things differently. One example that I want to give you is the Trade and Development Bank. And we've been talking to them over the years, and they said, look, we want to get into the green space. And the initial support was, can we create a green strategy? And they did that. Along with that, they decided to create another class of shares, Class C shares, which is green shares. And we supported that with $15 million. It will interest you to know that AFDB $15 million has been able now to help them knock on multiple doors. And at the end of probably this period, we're looking at a possibility of $100 million of equity and grant resources. But by just aligning in that green space and through the support of a partner institution, that was able to happen. It's the same. In Ethiopia, we had a program with Commercial Bank of Ethiopia where we said, look into your pipeline and can you come out with SMEs who are consistent with green outcomes, whether it's climate smart agriculture or renewable energy. And in Ethiopia, they managed to come up with over 30,000 SMEs. And we were able to give a particular facility, and when we blended it together with the grant resources from the European Union Development Fund, it was coming to barely a percent on the dollar of $240 million. And those are options that we're also exploring with KCB here, equity. All you have to do is to be able to align. So, and that's the power of that ESG. You may call it ESG, you may call it climate strategy, you may call it green strategy, but the old notion is, can we align around a powerful convergence and then use that to operationalize ideas and opportunities, and where, and then help us to be able to mobilize that scale of financing that can go everywhere. For SMEs, look, I'll be honest with you, the transaction cost for a $2 million lending is the same transaction cost for a $20 million lending. It's the same transaction cost for a $200 million lending. So if in East Africa, AFDB has to do $2 billion a year, I'm not going to do 1,000 units of $2 million each. I'd rather do 10 units of $200 million each. But however, I can come to Dr. John here and say, can we put about $1 million to your facility as a grant, help us aggregate those $2 million and aggregate them to probably $200 million, and then we do that as a program. I don't know if that makes sense. And that is the power of aggregation, but we need to be aligned around a common strategic language, and perhaps we could call that ESG. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that clarification. So what's clear is the unit cost of transactions remains the same, whether it's a $1 billion initiative or a $50,000 initiative. So what then means the issue is strategizing around how we can package an initiative to support SMEs. So you need, if I understood correctly, almost a special purpose vehicle or a fund that will then house these multitude of SMEs behind it. So it means we're learning new things, and hopefully we can help ourselves after. So I hope that it satisfies you for now, John. So Jules, coming to you. I want to understand, so you've heard the SME conversation, you've heard the global one. I want to understand how does AGF assist the market in the uptake of and unlocking green finance? Because everyone's talking about green finance and who is not included, but how do you unlock it in the first place? And how do you assist in the uptake of that? And if you could indulge me, what have been the challenges so far in this regard for AGF and just generally your perspective?
Thank you. So you have two questions. So the first one is how we uptake, and the second one is on the challenges. So let me start with the first one. You know, as AGF, what we do offer a risk-sharing solution and technical assistance. You know, today we are dealing with the top 20 banks in Kenya, and we've signed transactions in 45 countries in Africa. So the reason we are here today is mainly for one thing, the green transition. You know, the green transition is already happening. It's not something new. It's not a project. It's not something that is theoretical. It's happening. So the kind of message that we have with the financial institution, mainly with the commercial bank, is to tell them the green transition is there, and are you ready? Are you ready? So we need to make sure that the banks, the commercial banks, the financial institution, they are ready. And when we talk about being ready, it's at three levels. So the first one is at the capital level, the second one at the regulatory level, and the third one at the business level. So at the capital level, when you see what has been the development, you know, of the green capital market over the last, I would say, 10 years, it has been huge. If I give you numbers, you know, let's go back in 2014, the total volume of green bond that was issued was $15 billion worldwide, $15 billion of green bond. 2014, and then now we are in end of 2022, so end of last year, it was $600 billion of green bond. So over a period of 8 years, we went from 15 billion to 600 billion. So the conversation that we're having with the banks is that it will happen. When you even see like the projection, analysts, the researchers, they are projecting that this market will reach 100 trillion by 2050. So we are not trying to convince the bank. We are telling them that there is a huge opportunity to raise capital at a cheaper cost. But are you ready now to comply with all the ESG? Are you ready to meet all those requirements? You know, so see that as a business opportunity for you. And then now we go to the second level, the regulatory one. The policymaker, the central bank, they are adapting also their regulation, because you know what is the role of the policymaker, of the regulator, is to ensure that the financial system is stable. Now they are realizing that more and more the climate risk play a huge role in the financial risk. So if they want to make sure that the system is stable, they need also to incorporate, to integrate the climate risk as part of their global risk assessment. And what we are telling also to the commercial bank, how do you manage the commercial risk? How do you assess that? And you even have some regulator today, they are easing the capital, the kind of capital requirement for green project. So you come with a normal project, you have a certain level of capital requirement, but if that meet all the requirement of a green finance, you get different capital requirements. So they are trying to ease that. can also the commercial bank be able to leverage on that opportunity? And then the last part is on the business side. The green transition is there, and this is even the reason why we are here today, and it's touching all the sector in the economy. We take the transportation sector. Today we are talking about the electrical vehicle, so we are moving gradually from the fuel vehicle to the electrical one. We need the financial system to be able to assess this kind of project, because most of the SMEs, they don't do that because they care about climate. No, they see that as business opportunity. So when they will go now to the commercial bank with those projects, we need to make sure that the commercial bank, they are able to serve this big customer base. In the construction, today we are trying to build building that are climate friendly. You go in the agriculture sector, irrigation system, now they are climate friendly. You go to the energy sector, now we are trying to produce energy based on the renewable. So the entire ecosystem is moving towards the green transition. And the message we are having on a daily basis with our customer, because our customer are the banks, as we are de-risking them, we are de-risking their balance sheet, is to tell them, let's work together to make sure that we are ready to tap into this huge opportunity that is coming to raise more capital, to be able to have a bigger customer base, and also to meet the requirement of the regulator. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was really, really insightful.
The challenge was
Oh,
maybe...
yes, sorry, yes.
Yes, so the second question about the challenge that we are facing. Every time an investor, they have to make a decision, on which type of asset class they need to invest. They always look at two things, risk and return, okay? If I put my money in this business, what type of risk am I taking? What type of return am I expecting? So when we talk about the financial return and the financial risk, I think now is well known. There's a lot of kind of literature on how to measure the financial return, the ROE, the ROI, you have so many indicators. The financial risk, also today you have a lot of literature on how to measure that. The challenge that we are facing today is when it comes to the climate risk. How do you measure the climate risk? How do you measure the climate return? Climate return, we tend to talk about, the volume of CO2 that we avoided, but how do we translate then in financial terms? So today, the biggest challenge that we've been facing, mainly in convincing the bank, to finance more and more this type of project, is to put numbers that is kind of agree across the globe. When we talk about financial risk, climate risk, what are we talking about clearly? How do we measure that? When we talk about climate return, because we are doing good to the environment, to the nature, how do we measure that? As soon as we'll be able to put like a clear number that is kind of commonly agreed, I think the commercial bank, the financial institution, they will be more willing, to finance this type of project. Thank you.
So thank you so much for your time and also your insights. So for those of you who are in the SME space, you've just learned that there's a potential barrier to how you've been doing it. So now we need to repackage so that we can unlock. In terms of the green transition, it's here and it's not going anywhere. And as Africans now, we need to start being the front and center of these conversations. So I'm really, really happy that we got to talk to all of you. Unfortunately, we are behind time, so I'll have to conclude the panel now so that we kind of catch up. But thank you so much for your time. And guys, would you like to say one more thing? Okay, so one. Sorry. So I think I'm being bullied by the audience. So guys, protect me. But so what I will do is this. So I know it's burning because these are financiers, right? So this is what I will say. I will use the powers that Dr. Sheila has given me to give you 15 seconds. 15. Real 15. No, wait. 15 seconds. First, we need to agree. 15? 15? Great. So 15 seconds. Your time starts now. Go.
Thank you. Dawudi Kose from Kibra Societal Empowerment Peace in Budget Champion. I'm from Kibra Republic. My questions goes to Kilusa. Kilusa, my question is, how can these conversations be taken to grassroots youth-led organizations, apart from these boardroom conferences, this conversation of sustainable finance, climate risk, green finance, green bond. And my second question goes to
No. Time is up. Time
One
is
on
up.
one.
Time is up. You'll take it side chat. Thank you so much. Next. Thank you so much for both your questions. Unfortunately, we're down to 2 questions this time. So those who missed out, Paul. So really quickly, to answer your question, our deal rooms will answer that question for you as a start. To answer your question, our deal rooms too, but I'll let the gentleman answer. Again, very brief. Thank you so much.
No, mine is just the parting shot on my side, especially to the banks here. Make it easier for SMEs. Make it easier, simplify it. Don't make it fun, but make it easier for SMEs to get access to finance.
Jules?
Yes, quickly. Yes, so once again, it's about the green transition. You know, we will not go back. The green transition is happening. How do we make sure that this money goes up to the grassroots? We need to make sure first that the financial institution, they can tap into this capital market, right? And when we say green bond, so what is the purpose of a green bond? It's to finance green projects. So as they are raising this capital at a cheaper cost, we need also to ensure that the way they kind of deploy that capital goes exactly to this type of project. And this is where we play a huge role, because what we offer in terms of de-risking and also in terms of technical assistance, we do support financial institutions to be ready, but at the same time, we also work with the SMEs to have projects that are loan ready. Because we tend to tell that they have projects, but sometimes when you look the way these projects have been designed, they're not really loan ready. So we do work also with the grassroots, helping them to structure very well their loan application and their project. Thank you.
Philippe, over to you. So I'm touching 2 points and maybe answering the question there, but addressing 2 points that the colleague on my left made, which I think are quite powerful and sum up a lot of the discussion here. One is the issue of aggregation that we talked about. And it's not just SMEs. When we work in the renewable energy space, we have the ability to have them, for example, access to electricity to 1,500 people in northern Sierra Leone. That's great for those 1,500 people, but that's not going to get you very far, and it's not going to take me to a proper conversation with bankers. So it's about aggregating those into a proper platform, which is what we're trying to do. The other one, it's, again, my obsession point, obsessing about domestic capital. We talked as well about there isn't really a lack of capital, it's just how do you structure it. When we set up in Nigeria a credit enhancement facility like we're doing now, this was 6 years ago. Until then, pension funds and institutional investors only invested in Nigerian government bonds. Today, they can invest in a 20-year infrastructure asset class that has a proper credit enhancement behind it. We did the same thing in Pakistan. We're about to do the same thing in Kenya. So if we focus on the domestic capital that is locked up, as opposed to obsessing with cross-border, which is very complicated, risk-averse, as my colleague talked about earlier, we will get things happening.
Funzo, last but not least, you.
Good. Again, it's always hard to defend the bank. So 2 things, in the interest of time. I think it's also important to appreciate the fact that, and maybe we should hold ourselves responsible. We haven't done our best job of educating people to understand the language of money. I think that language rests with us. We know all of those beautiful jargons of finance, but the people who need the finance, they don't understand it. If you ask an average person, what do you understand in finance? Grant, loan. Do you understand that? And it's important to be able to understand that there are instruments, some of them can de-risk you at the early level. Some technical assistance can be converted to financial capital because some of them can handhold you into new markets. And they're not giving you money, they're just bringing you into new spaces. So it's important for us to unpack this thing and bring that knowledge closer to people who need it. The second thing is we have a paradox. Because every time you hear we need money, it's those who have money can't find projects. And those who have projects can't find money. So there's something that's missing, and I'm hoping this conversation and the rest of the week and all of those conversations will bring us closer so that the demand side and the supply side of finance can really come closer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. So on the note of knowledge sharing, as Kenya Green Building Society, I'm happy to inform you that we're having a knowledge sharing series. One of the topics is sustainable finance. One of the themes around this, so the main theme around this is building capacity to translate bankability in order to realize opportunity. And one of the initiatives we're doing with Alliance for Science, for purposes of today, is having a deal room and also a project showcase. The deal room is exclusive, but what we hope it will do is to get Africans to see African opportunities by Africans for Africa. The project showcase presents a unique opportunity, and I encourage you to be here for it. One, it gives those who've finished projects an opportunity to brag. You've done the hard work and you've done it. The second, it gives those who've started their journey an opportunity to showcase what they're doing. So they might not be deal ready, but they will have people within the space to kind of tell them, it's a good initiative, but it needs ABC. And third, for people like me and you who are in the room, it gives us an opportunity to then start looking at our next project. So then we move different as we move forward. And I want to tell you that as KGBS, one of the key priorities we have is to unlock any disconnect between the market and the opportunity. So we'll be more than happy to discuss it with all of you really and take it forward. We have friends in the room like FSD Africa who are always supportive in sharing and contributing to sessions. So the financiers are there, the will is here. We all need to just sit down and have more conversations, translate that into action points and knowledge that will build capacity, unlock bankability, to realize the opportunity. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. So I will release you guys, but thank you so much for your time. All right, guys. So our last panel before I release you guys to lunch is an important one. The third discussion we're having today is on building resilience for the urban poor, known as BCRUP. This session will explore what BCRUP is and also look at it from a capacity building and in the context of what it means for cities in Africa. So when you look at the African conversation and rapid urbanization, I said this at the beginning of the day, the key conversation around the built environment is centered and founded on people. Africa, as I said, will be home to 1.4 billion people by 2030. Most of those people, unfortunately, will be living in informal settlements, slum areas, and, unfortunately, more than often exposed to poverty rather than opportunity. But we have time to change that narrative. So, before I invite the panel today, the focus of building urban resilience for the climate poor, for the urban poor, is an important one. And I want to invite the experts to talk about why it's important and to conclude on the potential next steps and opportunities. Starting with the moderator, Dr. Robert Songori, who is the Director for Climate, Biodiversity and Food Systems at the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, UCLG Africa. Dr. Songori is an expert, matters cities and built environment, and currently serves as a member of the National Steering Committee on promoting energy efficiency buildings in East Africa, as well as being a member of the Green Growth Economy Team for Kenya. Dr. Songori has also served in both the private sector and civil service for over 7 years as an environmentalist and a housing development expert with active involvement in industry-shaping conversations, especially around the National Housing Policy Program. He is also a key figure in facilitating sustainable use of environmental resources within the built environment. His focus around research initiatives on the built environment has also greatly contributed to appropriate building materials and technologies in Kenya. Dr. Songori, please allow me to welcome you to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause. Up next, please allow me to welcome Florence Nyole, who is the president of the Architectural Association of Kenya. Florence is not just a friend, she's a champion within the built environment who drives the agenda from the Architectural Association of Kenya. It's worth mentioning that Florence has and continues to be a long-standing friend of the Kenya Green Building Society and is a key figure in the built environment who also has a keen interest in championing inclusivity in her role. And it's worth noting that Florence will be one of only 3 women to have ever led the Architectural Association of Kenya. And I'm really happy to see that Mugure is a predecessor at the Architectural Association of Kenya. So really nice to see Wonder Women in action here. Up next, please allow me to introduce Dr. Jones Atella, who is the founder and executive director of the Africa Research and Impact Network, also known as ARIN. Dr. Jones Atella is an accomplished executive with over 15 years of experience in research and providing technical support to African governments in natural resource management, climate change mitigation and adaptation, knowledge management as well. He currently serves as the founder and executive director of ARIN, and he excels in developing strong, evidence-based actions and strategies, which Dr. Sheila would appreciate as a scientist, that are adaptable and well linked to national, regional, and international climate change initiatives. At the strategic level, Jones is a member of several high-level technical boards and is the lead expert in the development of the African Union Green Innovation Framework, which guides member states in accelerating green growth actions. Please allow me to welcome Dr. Jones Atella. Our next panelist, Omar Silla, who is the Regional Office Director for Africa for the UN Habitat, is a key figure in the UN Habitat family. Before this, he was a branch coordinator for urban legislation, land and governance in the UN from September 2015. He was also the head of the UN Habitat's land and GLTN unit, prior to which he served as a senior advisor in the UN Habitat's Regional Office for Africa and was a focal point in supporting urban policies and development. In short, he was a champion, is a champion, and will remain a champion that we're really proud to partner with. Please welcome Omar Silla from the UN Habitat. Our next panelist is Dr. Konyango Charles Otieno, who is the National Director for Urban Development at the State Department for Housing and Urban Development from the Republic of Kenya. Dr. Konyango, I'm told, is the encyclopedia of BCROP. So I don't know if I should say anything else beyond that, because it's the start, finish, and middle to it. But with his extensive experience on this matter, we thought it was important for him to be part of this conversation because he also represents the Kenyan government's perspective in what it means for African cities. Dr. Konyango, kindly join us. And last but not least, allow me to welcome our final panelist this morning, who's Ambassador Jean-Pierre Elong Mbasi, who's the Secretary General. He's not around? Oh, sorry, guys. So I understand he's not managed to make it this morning, but now I can hand over to Dr. Sangori to take up the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nasra. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, all our participants. To our speakers this afternoon, good afternoon once again. I think we have very short time, but the session is going to be an interesting one, I trust, as we start. And probably as Nasra may have said, I want just to refresh to the minds of those in the room that in this context of the city platforms, we have two categories of people. We have the people who can manage their issues well within the city frame, but there are those who are challenged. So the challenge group fall under the category that then is the subject matter of what we want to discuss. How then do we deal with the vulnerable groups in light of the climate change discourses that we are having today and tomorrow and into the future? And so with that, I would just want to say that the building climate change for the urban poor, as some of us in the room, I trust, may have known, is as its genesis from the UN Climate Action Summit of 2019, where out of the 9 tracks of the UN Secretary General's call to action, one of the tracks was on infrastructure, cities, and local actions. And within that track, the 5 sub-tracks which were defined, one was on buildings, another one was on transportation, another one was on building climate resilience of the urban poor, the other one was on decentralized financing, and the last one was on subnational mobilization. So looking at all those 5 areas, then what the subject matter we are dealing with now in this room is the most significant one under how to deal with the population which are vulnerable under the building climate resilience of the urban poor. And so that is what the panelists who are in front of us are going to delve deep into in the discussion, and we see how we connect the conversation which we take from here into the African Climate Summit, which is a very interesting kind of event that we are having in our lifetime today in this discourse. So in short, I just want to then come back to our panelists, and with that, I may not be in the order with which you are called. So I will try to look at, because I can see we have the government representation, we have the global community represented by UN Habitat, we have the research, fraternity represented by RN with Dr. Taylor, and of course we have the practitioners whom then are led by the AAK, the Architectural Association of Kenya, in this engagement. And so I'll just then go straight to Dr. Konyango from the national perspective and the policy direction. And one of the key issues that is to come out, which the audience would then interact with, is in terms of the last statement that Nasra mentioned, that you are the encyclopedia of BCRAP. And so the audience may want to know, how this then plays out and what they can pick. And so in that case, maybe we just probably could want to check what you then bring out from the big crab conversation, and of course its significance to the African continent, given that we are having a pre-event to the African Climate Summit. And so welcome, Dr. Konyango.
Thank you very much, Robert. That is quite loaded. I hope I'll be able to carry that load on my shoulders. Let me start by saying that we are investing a lot in our urban areas as the engines of our economies, and that without our urban areas having been retrofitted and without our urban areas having been well structured and infrastructured to be able to drive the economy of our nations, we can never be able to attain middle income status with quality of living for our residents. Therefore, our urban areas are at the center of the climate discourse, not only in Africa, but across the globe. When we look at the climate issues, I want to say that climate vulnerability within our urban areas presents the next urban crisis in this continent and in the world at large. It is therefore very important that within the national discourse of urbanization and within the national policies on urbanization, we put climate resilience issues at the core if we are to attain national growth and the contribution to the national GDP and the subnational own source revenue generation. And by extension, therefore, quality of living for our residents. In order to stem this crisis, Kenya and Brazil are championing the building of climate resilience for the urban poor as directed during the Climate Summit of 2019, where the building climate resilience for the urban poor was mooted. If I go specifically to Kenya, from 2009 to 2018, we were able to map the growth in terms of vulnerability from a population of 4.2 million urban residents across this nation that were vulnerable to climate impact. In terms of the hotspots, we moved from in the year 2009, we were at 4.2 million. By the year 2018, that population had risen to 5.9 million residents that were climate vulnerable. If you take the case of Nairobi, it is screaming. The reason is that if you take, for example, the case of floods, first of all, 60% of the residents in Nairobi are living in informal settlements, and therefore in climate vulnerable areas. Nairobi sits at the confluence of 6 rivers. And so when it floods, 60% of those living in informal settlements cannot be able to access livelihood areas. 46% of women cannot be able to access basic health care. 60% of children in informal settlements cannot be able to access schools when it floods. In other words, when it floods, Nairobi comes to a standstill. That is just on the incident of flooding alone. Issues of food insecurity, issues of markets that are closed, issues of jobs, that therefore comes to a standstill because, again, in terms of industries and so forth, it is this quartile of the population that are therefore serving our industries in terms of employment and in terms of skill sets that are required to keep our industries moving. I want to say, therefore, that issues of climate resilience, as an opener, has to be at the core. And that is why we have adopted the new urban agenda and the call within the SDG for leaving no one behind. In our urban areas, unless we mainstream and we have an affirmative action for the vulnerable urban poor, then we will not meet that call for leaving no one behind. We will be having very skewed urban development that therefore does not render itself to overall national economic development and holistic growth. Thank you, Robert.
Just on that perspective, maybe just one more issue is that in the process of all that you have described, what are some of the challenges that you have encountered as a national government and as we move into the operationalization of the Building Climate Resilience of the Urban Poor initiative? Some of the challenges which may then want to be picked by the audience.
The major challenge, one, is building resilience not for, but with the urban poor. They know their state, they know their living condition, they know what is it that needs to be retrofitted within the urban areas, and therefore it is planning with the urban poor and building the resilience together with them. There are foundation infrastructure that must be put in place. We need to look at our roads in terms of accessibility, whether they are climate resilience infrastructure, which then needs to form part and parcel of the urban re-engineering. We need to carry out urban regeneration, which looks specifically at the areas where our urban poor are living. We need to fit and fix the economic stimulus packages for these urban poor. Issues of markets has got to be done. Issues of small and medium scale enterprises that fit within the urban poor, and much more than that, the issue of funding, because funding the building climate resilience with the urban poor requires a huge lot of funding. It's not something that would fit within the framework of the national government budgets. And this calls, for partners with like minds to come on board to walk this road of retrofitting our urban areas and ensuring that climate resilience for the urban poor are at the core. Indeed, when we do our national budgets and we are able to invest in many areas that would lift up the economy, unless we focus on the building climate resilience for the urban areas, all our investments within our urban areas are just going down the drain. So funding is a critical issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kunyango. I think there are a lot of reflections that will be picked from the conversation that you just introduced to this conversation. And allow me then, therefore, to go to Omar Silla. And we have heard from the national perspective, but I know UNCTAD works with the regional states, and so Kenya is one of those states anyway. So in your view, how are you working with what's the expectation of the regional states that you work with in terms of taking the big data agenda forward?
Thank you very much, Robert. First of all, let me appreciate the leadership of the government of Kenya of lifting, this concept of resilience for urban poor. I think we cannot emphasize, the relevance of this topic as we see, the trend of urbanization we are seeing in Africa. but most importantly, we have 56% of urban population in informal settlement. We are in dire need conditions, access to water, access to sanitations, access to basic services, and I think this COVID-19 has demonstrated the vulnerability of those citizens, living in informal settlement. And now this crisis of climate change, I think this is a category we need to look at it and to watch out and how we can improve their living conditions. Of course, we need to draw lesson why we are at this particular situation and juncture, because we fail our planning system. We fail on the implementation of our policy and regulations, and we do not manage to link rural and urban in the way that we treat our urban fabric, and that's the reason why now we are overwhelmed. And we will see more people coming to cities with these food security, scarcities, with all those elements we are seeing. And for us on UN Habitat is a long-term perspective, but multi-layer perspective, in a sense that we look at this matter global, regional and country level, and I think that's where the role of UN Habitat has been critical on championing, this concept, big crap, at the beginning. And I think when we start this process, 2009, as you mentioned it, Konyango, and there's a lot that has happened for us to be able to raise the issue in terms of advocacy, but also creating this momentum among member states. One I can name is this first urban ministerial conference during the COP27 in Egypt. First time Ministry of Urban Development come together to think about the trajectory to take to address the issue of urban resilience in Africa, because I think we have a silo approach in the issue of climate change, and that's something we need to look at as well when we are discussing this week, because the issue is cutting across different sectors, different ministries, and different actors that need to sit together and to devise what we call this integrated approach, which means that Ministry of Local Government, Ministry of Urban Development need to work closely with Ministry of Environment. Even when we have been discussing this planning process, we were shocked the fact that Ministry of Urban Development was not sitting around the table of negotiation of the declaration. Another point I mentioned is this just concluded United Nations Habitat Assembly in June, and thanks to the government of Kenya for hosting 90 member states here in Kenya to reflect where we are now in terms of policy, urban policy, but also in terms of addressing emerging challenges, including financial crisis, climate change, insecurity we are seeing, because we cannot treat the issue of poor and vulnerability without thinking as well the dimension of insecurity with conflict emerging, as we have seen in Africa. That's another dimension. That was the reason why this Habitat Assembly was looking into the crisis of multilateralism, globally speaking, but Africa as well is facing this crisis of multilateralism. What is good from this process is the consensus you are seeing on emerging issues in a number of sectors. And one element, of course, is a link between climate change and urbanization, because we don't talk about it more. I think we have been fighting for this week to make sure at least, during this presidential dialogue, there's a discussion around this issue and the link between climate change and urbanization. So there's a resolution and consensus among member states that we need this integrated approach. We need to connect rural and urban and to connect different sectors on the way we are addressing the issue of climate change. Because for me, I'm convinced in Africa and elsewhere, the battle of climate change will be won or lost in cities, and we have seen it. What we have seen in Mozambique, what we have seen in Malawi, are reflecting, the challenge that secondary cities are facing and intermediate cities. And we were happy to get last year here, congregate from local government to discuss the role of secondary cities is achieving, this sustainable development goal, but at the same time, how we can support them to localize these approaches of climate change. I think is very important. The second resolution, which was from Kenya, of course, and congratulations to Kenya government for leading on this resolution of the adequate housing. We cannot treat the issue of urban poor without talking about shelter. I think this is a critical of talking about the crisis of housing. We talk about the previous session, the issue of financing that people are facing, affordability and adequacy of the housing scheme, but also looking new technology and innovation of housing. Welcome to building material and others is very important, which means that this is an opportunity we have. And I call upon, different statements from the PS Charles Inga, always saying we are missing something, the way we are seeing housing in Africa, because we are not able to create the job we want to create, the industrialization we want to have, the social function we want to have from housing, which means that this resolution, I think, comes at the right moment, where it's not Africa is suffering from this housing deficit. Even in the US today, There's a huge debate in Canada, there's a huge debate about affordable housing, which means that there's a cross-fertilizer we can do, but also in the context of Africa, what is really required to unlock this potential on the housing sector. I think innovation there, science should come on board, technology should come on board, digital should come on board to see what is needed to be done. Another resolution was the one on early warning, of course, which was led by the Africa Group, because we need to see the preparedness from Africa, local government and other institutions. But also we can see some challenges when it comes to this early warning. And the first challenge is the data element, especially when it comes to urban poor and informal settlement. Even from us, our angle, we have our monitoring system, but we are still struggling on getting the right data when it comes to informal settlement. Which means that if you really want to have this preparedness and this response, we need to look at the monitoring system data. And we are glad to see the African Union coming now with some kind of mechanism for the early warning, but also we need to look at the foresight system of it, and that's where resilience starts. Because if you have all elements, nationally speaking, data speaking, capacity dedicated to local government, that way they can be proactive and put in place policies and approaches that can help them really to prevent those damages we are saying. As we have now to live with climate change, now it's more about mitigation after going to adaptation. And the last resolution, which was very important, is from South Africa. I think South Africa is always struggling when it comes to informality, and we have seen it take into consideration the legacy in this country and maybe the historical grievances in this country. Of course, informality is a very important and very delicate issue that the country is dealing, and they have put forward this resolution and set some target by 2030, how much progress we want to make in transforming positively informal settlement, improving living conditions, whether it's about access to water, sanitation, and governance system inclusivity. I think it's very important. For us, I think this is offering, Robert, a new momentum. We should build on and raising the flag and make sure the issue we are discussing goes beyond, Kenya, and learning from each other. Like we talk about Brazil, they are facing the same issue in Kenya. Kibera is there, but Brazil, when it comes to favelas and other, I think the issue is critical. Another dimension I want to bring is the regional dimension, because we should as well praise those efforts that African Union are taking, to advance this issue of urban resilience. Luckily now there's a framework of urban resilience, which is the African framework, and building on this green building resilient framework they established. And now the question is how to guide member states in terms of policy, in terms of action-oriented, but also in terms of financing, so that we see the role of cities being, elevated at the level where they can take responsibility and take, the forefront, in terms of supporting communities, which is very important. For us, our role of UN Habitat, we are partnering with the African Union, we are partnering with UNDP, developing what we call a regional program of smart urban resilience, because we cannot talk about urban resilience without looking, the digital dimension, looking into, the new technology in terms of rapid reaction, in terms of readiness, but also in terms of capacity building. I think this offers another opportunity to elevate what we are doing in Kenya on the big crop and make sure this has a, global but also regional understanding from others, but also how others can learn from what's going on in Kenya. And it's not, I'm not praising what Kenya is doing, but objectively from my observation, I've been in many African countries these last 6 months, and what I'm seeing here in Kenya, I think there's a lot those other countries can learn in terms of, putting policies, in terms of putting framework and supporting, those hotspots, when it comes to informal settlement and urban poor. I think those are just some elements I want to bring in the forefront of this conversation, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. If I draw from your points, one of the key points coming out is how to deal or how to take the principle of leave no one behind when it comes to dealing with the critical subject matter of the urban poor, and in terms of the issues of adaptation, resilience. Just to mention a few, rising from what both Dr. Punyako and yourself has just brought out. And so these are real issues that in the city framework we are dealing with, and especially from the African perspective, the adaptive capacity of our cities. And so when we now down to the population themselves, the diagnostic perspective, then that becomes critical. And so allow me then to bring our only lady in the panel to bring the dimension in terms of the kind of support which probably has come to the built environment to support the discourse that we are dealing with. In your perspective, do you feel you get enough support in this process because you are at the tail end of implementation? Because we have brought the international perspective, we have the national perspective, but the implementation process from the built environment actors. Talk to the audience about this.
All right. Thank you very much, Robert, and good afternoon, everyone. I think just to pick it up from the conversation that is ongoing here is the idea of leave no one behind. And when people talk about leave no one behind, I think it's not just about the people you're designing for, but even the people who will be designing. And I think built environment professionals were literally brought at the tail end of policies and conversations that have taken place, and it's for us to implement. But I think one of the most important things we need to do is to be allowed to be in the room at the table where decisions are being made, conversations are being had in terms of policy. Because then you're able to bring in the technical perspective around how to achieve the resilience that we're looking for. And so in terms of, for instance, this particular launch that we're having today is that we need to have professionals on board right from the word go, from the beginning, because we're able to look and see how we're actually going to implement this thing. When we're talking about, a sentence in a document translates to concrete on the ground for us, how do you translate that? So it's important that built environment professionals are brought on board. But that being said, yes, I think the government does have professionals in its establishment, and they are involved. But I think just opening it up to ensure that we are at the seat when decisions are being made, and I think it's very important because we're also able to look at other things and the solutions that are being provided. Are they actually feasible? Can they actually be implemented when we get to the ground? I think the second thing is to look at the idea of being part of what we call the stakeholder engagement at the end of the day. One of the things we saw, and I think our association was at the forefront of this, is that during COVID-19, people were bombarded with the disease itself, but also the challenge of not being able to have access the economic activities like going to work or even getting out of town and so on and so forth. And most importantly is around that same time we experienced a lot of flooding around that period. And we've even gone ahead to sit down as an association and together with participants, like for instance we've worked together with the Red Cross, for instance, to talk about the issue of flooding in our country. And being able to actually partner is something that's important. It's already been noted as we're speaking earlier on in the panels this morning that we need to partner because we can't do it on our own. And I think that's something that we need to see as much as possible that it is being done. I think the other thing to look at is also policies that are being implemented. And I think the policy should not just look at conversations that are being had in the rooms, but when you go out there, one of the things that's lacking, and we'll see this happening in our country, is that a lot of development has gone ahead of planning. A lot of it. People are building, but we don't have plans upon which you're basing this construction and this building upon. And I know it's not just a Kenyan issue. I know it's